Greeting latency. Walk into a room and watch their eyes. There's a gap, sometimes a half second, sometimes 2 full beats, between the moment they see you and when the smile lands or your name comes out. That gap is data, and it's almost impossible to manufacture. Your face triggers an involuntary response before any social mask has time to install itself, which means you're watching raw preference play out in real time. If someone's eyes light up the instant you appear, their brain already had you filed under "someone I want to see" before the rest of their body caught up. That's genuine pleasure at your presence, unfiltered. But when there's lag, dead air where they process you first, then produce the greeting, something shifts in the calculation. Maybe you're fine, but not a priority. Maybe there's friction neither of you has named yet. Maybe you're playing background music to their day instead of something they actually lean toward. The neuroscience underneath is simpler than the sting might feel. Greeting latency maps directly to cognitive load. People don't delay their response to people they've been thinking about or expecting because those people are already loaded into working memory. Your arrival doesn't require processing work. But if you're filed under acquaintance or complicated, your face triggers actual mental effort. And that effort takes milliseconds. The smile still comes. The words still happen. But there's a measurable pause between stimulus and response. Like your presence needs translation. Watch this in yourself. Notice how fast your face moves when your actual best friend shows up versus someone you're socially obligated to greet. The speed is entirely involuntary. You cannot fake instant recognition, no matter how hard your intentions try. The real trap is reading too much into a single instance, because latency shifts with sleep, stress, worry, or whether someone's lost in their own thoughts. But patterns solidify over months. People who genuinely value your presence rarely make you wait for evidence of it, and that's the part worth noticing. The eyebrow flash test. Watch someone's face the moment they see you walk into a room. Not what happens after they've had time to think, but that raw first instant. If their eyebrows shoot up, just that quick flick upward lasting maybe a fifth of a second, you've witnessed something they cannot fake, no matter how skilled they are at conversation. That tiny muscle movement is called an eyebrow flash, and it's hardwired into human neurology, the automatic tell of genuine pleasure, of recognition arriving as a pleasant surprise. The brain doesn't committee it. The eyebrows simply fire before performance kicks in. Most people have zero awareness their face is betraying them this way. A person might control their smile, rehearse their tone, even engineer warmth into their voice with surgical precision, but that eyebrow lives in the gap between thought and speech, where the mask hasn't yet locked into place. When someone's eyes light and their brows rise as you approach, you're touching something closer to the actual feeling than any words that follow will be. The inverse cuts just as deep. If someone looks at you and their eyebrows stay flat, or worse, pinch inward and down, you're landing as a threat or at best as neutral terrain. Not excitement, not delight. Some people will still perform friendliness, engaging smoothly and appropriately, but there's a visible gap between the gesture and what the muscle knows, a quiet contradiction that your nervous system catches, even if your conscious mind hasn't. Here's the move that matters. Don't turn yourself into a face detective, interrogating everyone's micro-expressions like evidence in a trial. Instead, notice your own pattern over time. Who makes your eyebrows jump? Who leaves them still? Then sit with that honestly. Does that physical reaction match what you actually want from each relationship? Because people show you how they truly feel before they've even decided what to say, and the face remembers what the mouth forgets. The upgrade from hi to your name. Watch what happens when someone who's been calling you hey suddenly starts saying hey Sarah or hey Marcus. It's so quiet you'll miss it if you're not paying attention, but your nervous system won't. Your brain's reward centers light up differently when you hear your actual name than when you hear a pronoun or nothing at all. Names are specific. They say, you are not background noise. You are someone I've decided is worth the mental effort to retrieve and use. Neuroscience backs this up hard. The brain treats personalization as a signal of genuine attention, not just politeness performed on autopilot. Think about the people closest to you, the ones who naturally weave your name into casual moments, the throwaway greetings, the mid-conversation asides. You probably trust them more, feel more seen by them, maybe without ever knowing why. This is why retail training literally teaches people to use customer names. The technique works because it's mimicking something real that brains recognize as genuine care. But here's the catch. Upgrading to your name is nearly impossible to fake consistently over time. You can manufacture politeness, you can rehearse small talk, you can even program a smile, but actually, integrating someone's name into easy, unguarded moments requires your brain to have already filed them under worth remembering before you ever speak. It's involuntary. Conversely, if someone knows you well and still defaults to generic greetings while using everyone else's names, they've sorted you into a different category entirely. Maybe closer, maybe part of the circle where formality feels weird. The real signal isn't just whether they use your name, it's the ease and automaticity of it. When someone has to think before personalizing, they're still deciding about you. But someone whose brain uses your name so naturally, they probably don't even notice. That's someone who's already written you into their world as significant enough to warrant that tiny, daily recognition. Notice it. It matters more than you think. Name usage frequency. Listen for the simple thing that almost nobody tracks on purpose. How many times does someone actually say your name in a conversation? Not in a forced, creepy way. Just naturally woven in. Someone who does this consistently is telling you something loud with something quiet. They're spending the tiny extra neural energy it takes to index you as a separate person, a being worth naming aloud. And most people don't do that for someone they're indifferent to. It's the conversational equivalent of reaching across a table instead of shouting from across the room. Now flip it. Watch the person who talks at you for 20 minutes and never once drops your name. Not because they're hostile, but because you're not actually indexed in their mind as a distinct person. You're a listener, a wall, a convenient ear. The texture feels different too. Someone genuinely fond of you will sprinkle your name into sentences without planning it, almost like their brain is naturally calling you into focus. Hey Sarah, did you see that? Or, I was thinking about what you said, Marcus. It's not strategy, it's just what happens when someone's attention has actually locked onto you. But here's where it gets interesting. Pay attention to the person who says your name only when they need something. Hey, I've been meaning to ask you, David. Right before the ask, right before the favor. That's name usage as a tool, a warm-up, a calculated softening of the ground. The difference lives in the feel, not the raw count. Someone who values you drops your name because they want you to feel seen and real. Someone using you strategically deploys it because they know it works. It's the same word, different intent. The gap between them is tiny and electric. Next time you're in a text chain or a call, notice whether your name appears at all. Then listen carefully to what comes right after it enters the room. That pause, that shift in tone, it tells you everything you need to know about where you actually sit in their mind. Nickname invention. Someone gives you a nickname and it sticks. Not the mean kind, not the forced kind, the kind that emerges naturally in conversation, something they actually use when talking to you or about you later without ever announcing it as a nickname. A genuine nickname is a small act of belonging that happens below the surface of politeness. When people invent names for you, they're doing something beneath language. They're playing with intimacy. Collapsing distance, treating you like someone worth memorizing in shorthand. Your friend doesn't nickname the barista. They nickname the person whose inner world feels familiar enough to compress into a single syllable or a playful variation. The person they plan to keep around long enough for a private signal to matter. Think about who's given you names that actually caught on, the ones you don't cringe at, the ones that feel warm against your ear. They didn't generate those from politeness or obligation. They generated them because some part of your personality, or a funny moment, or a running joke inside your two-person universe felt significant enough to reduce into a name only they use. It's the opposite of anonymous. A nickname is someone saying, I see you specifically, and I'm going to mark that seeing in my own language. And here's the flip side. People who don't invent nicknames for you, who keep your name formal and unchanged across every conversation, are often maintaining a particular kind of distance. Not hostile, necessarily, just bounded. They haven't moved you into the category of people worth teasing, worth compressing, worth remembering through a funnier name. The absence can whisper as loudly as the presence. When someone naturally creates a nickname for you and uses it without apology, they've already decided you're worth the cognitive real estate. They've moved you from acquaintance into someone whose presence registers enough to deserve a signature. Notice who bothers. It's not romance or pity or effort. It's the opposite of all those things. It's ease. The reciprocal question test. You're telling someone about your week, a small win, a frustration, something that actually mattered, and you finish by asking them how things are going. Watch what happens next. Do they answer your question, or do they keep the spotlight trained on themselves? This asymmetry is not random, and it's not always obvious on a single conversation. When someone genuinely values you, curiosity flows both ways. They want to know your answer because they're actually interested in you, not just waiting for their turn to talk or scrolling through their own urgent thoughts while you speak. The reciprocal question test is deceptively simple. After you share something, notice whether they ask you a follow-up or circle back to how you're doing. Not every single time. People have off days, terrible moods, attention limits, stress that narrows their world. But over a month of normal conversations, the pattern becomes undeniable. Someone who cares will come back to it. They'll ask about the thing you mentioned last week. They'll wonder how it turned out. They'll ask what you're thinking about now. Someone just checking boxes will give a quick, "That's cool," or "Nice," and then pivot hard to their own story. Or worse, let the conversation flatline entirely. Here's the trick. Many of us are trained to be polite listeners, so we mask this instinct. We ask questions we don't really care about, performing interest like actors. But the questions people ask, without prompting, when they remember to ask, when they follow up unprompted, when your life somehow stayed in their head between conversations, those reveal the real temperature. If you're always the one steering toward your own stuff, always the one asking first, always the one bringing news or problems to the table, that's data. It doesn't mean they dislike you, but it does tell you how much real estate you're occupying in their mind. The people who ask unbidden are the ones who kept you in there. Pay attention to who remembers what you said. Question depth escalation. You mention you're thinking about switching careers. Someone who doesn't care much will nod and move on. Maybe ask what the new job pays, but someone who's genuinely invested, they'll ask why you're feeling stuck now. Then they'll ask what you actually want to do instead. Then they'll ask if you're scared of failing or bored with success or both. Each question digs a layer deeper, like someone who wants to understand, not just the what, but the why, underneath the why. Watch closely here. It's not about being nice or polite. It's about whether someone is building a map of who you are or just making small talk. The person asking surface questions, "So, what's the new company called?" isn't necessarily cold. They might just be uncertain how close you are, or they might process information differently. But the person who asks follow-up questions, that spiral inward, that reference things you said 3 conversations ago, that show they're actively thinking about how the pieces fit together, that person has decided you matter. They're spending real cognitive energy on you. They're treating your life like it's actually worth understanding, not just worth being polite about. The flip side matters too. If someone keeps asking you about your external circumstances but never digs into what you actually feel, what you want, or what you're afraid of, you're getting the conversation equivalent of a weather report. They're tracking facts, not reaching for you. Pay attention the next time you tell someone something real about yourself. Do they ask a follow-up that goes deeper, or do they pivot back to themselves, or do they leave a silence that tells you they heard the words, but not the weight behind them? Notice also whether they remember the thread weeks later, whether your answer becomes part of how they see you, or whether each conversation starts fresh. The questions people ask, the way they ask them, and whether they circle back, that's a map of your place in their world. That escalation either happens or it doesn't, and it almost never lies. The interest ceiling question. You know that thing you do where you mention something you care about, a project, a struggle, a win, and the other person's eyes kind of glaze over, or they listen, but don't ask a follow-up. That's the interest ceiling, and it tells you something sharp about how much mental real estate you occupy in their head. When someone genuinely wants to know you, they dig deeper. They ask the second question, the one that shows they actually heard you and want more. They remember the detail from last week and loop it back into conversation now. They ask how it turned out, what you're going to do next, how you felt about it. That's the tell, but here's the real thing. Notice where their questions stop. Someone might ask once out of politeness, social reflex, nothing more. The true measure is whether they ask again, unprompted, days later, without you having to remind them. Do they remember your thing and bring it up later? Do they actually want to understand your reasoning, or are they just waiting for their turn to talk? When someone doesn't care much, the conversation stays shallow, even if they're smiling and nodding along. You feel it in how fast they pivot to their own story, the way a meaningful pause gets filled before you can breathe. The tricky part is this: people will do the first question for almost everyone. It's the second, third, and fourth questions that separate the people who see you from the people who tolerate you. Watch for the person who remembers what you said 3 conversations ago and connects it to today without you having to explain the whole context again. That's someone actively building a real model of who you are, not just collecting random data points. The interest ceiling is where someone stops asking, and it's almost always lower than you'd like to believe. Pay attention to it anyway, because it's rarely wrong. Back channel density. Listen closely next time you're talking to someone you think cares about you. Are they saying, yeah, I see, go on, those little verbal nods that show active tracking? Or is it dead air, just their face pointed at you while their mind is somewhere else? That gap matters more than you'd think, because back-channeling, those small affirming sounds and words that people throw in while you're speaking, is actually a live meter of engagement and respect running in real time. When someone is genuinely invested in what you're saying, their brain runs a kind of automatic feedback loop they can't shut off. The hums come naturally, sprinkled through your sentences, like they're co-creating the story with you, building it together. When they don't, when the line goes quiet, except for your own voice carrying the whole weight, it usually means one of 3 things. They're distracted and checked out. They've already made up their mind about you, so listening feels pointless, or they're just waiting for their turn to talk about themselves. But the real signal is in density, not just whether back-channeling happens, but how often it lands. Someone who respects your intelligence will back-channel less frequently than someone who thinks you need constant reassurance to keep talking. A peer who sees you as an equal will back-channel steadily, at intervals that feel natural, almost like a quiet conversation humming underneath the main one. Someone who sees you as beneath them might over-back-channel in a performative way, like they're performing interest they don't actually feel, or under-back-channel, because why bother investing the energy? The pattern tells you everything about how they've sorted you in their head. Next time you're mid-story, stop trying so hard to be funny or impressive, and instead pay attention to the rhythm of their affirmations. The pauses, the frequency, the warmth in their voice. That rhythm is one of the most honest things a person will ever communicate to you. Agreement that arrives too fast. You finish making your point, something that took you weeks to think through, something that matters, and the person across from you nods immediately. Yeah, totally, you're right. No pause, no questions, no reflection baked into their voice. And something in your gut goes quiet and cold. That's not validation hitting you. That's dismissal wearing a friendly mask. Real agreement has texture. It arrives with friction first, a moment where someone actually tests what you've said against their own experience, maybe pushes back a little, sits with it. When someone agrees too fast, they're not hearing you. They're checking a box. They're already 3 steps ahead in the conversation, or they're simply not invested enough to slow down. Think about the people you trust most. When you tell them something real, do they rush to affirm? Or do they sometimes go quiet? Do they ask what you mean? Do they occasionally disagree, or at least make you prove it? That's the sound of someone actually listening. Fast agreement often masks a few things running underneath. They don't think your idea matters enough to examine. They're already bored and moving toward the exit. Or they agree, not because they believe it, but because agreement keeps the peace and keeps you talking so they don't have to. The cruelest version is the performative yes, the one that says, I hear you, while actually meaning, I want you to stop. Humans who genuinely care enough to think alongside you will create tiny moments of friction, questions, silence, maybe even productive disagreement. If someone always meets you with instant harmony, check whether you're actually connecting or just performing for an audience of one. Real intimacy, whether it's friendship, love, or work, lives in the space where someone takes your idea seriously enough to wrestle with it. Speed rarely lives there. The next time someone says yes too fast, notice what happens in your chest. That cold feeling is your instinct flagging something real. The ones who are worth your time will make you wait a beat before they answer. The performative nodding loop. You're mid-sentence about something that matters to you, and the person across from you is bobbing their head like a dashboard figurine. Nod, 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 but their eyes somewhere else. Maybe their phone buzzed. Maybe they're thinking about lunch. The nod keeps going anyway, mechanical and rhythmic, like their body is playing a recording while they've already left the room. That's not agreement. That's not even listening. That's a script they learned long ago. How to appear present when you're actually gone. The performative nod is the most honest form of dishonesty because it admits the truth while lying. It says, I am here and I don't care at the same time. And somehow, both statements fit into the same gesture. Real listeners do something completely different. They pause, they shift their weight, they ask a question that shows they actually landed on something you said, not just the sound of your voice. They nod maybe once, genuinely, because the idea moved them, not because they're performing the role of person listening. When someone is genuinely engaged, their nods are sparse and earned. But watch someone who isn't interested, and the nods come fast and steady. A wave of artificial validation that actually means nothing. It's the conversational equivalent of uh-huh on repeat. And here's the trap. It feels nice in the moment. You think you're being heard. The nodding is supposed to make you feel safe, but it's a false floor, and it taught you something important anyway. Next time you catch yourself doing the performative nod with someone, try something riskier. Be honest about your attention. Say, I'm tired right now, but I want to hear this properly when I can actually focus. Or ask them to pause so you can be real with them. The nod that costs nothing reveals everything about how little you value what they're saying. Break the loop, and you break something that was never genuine anyway, and you give the other person something rare, permission to stop performing too. The polite acknowledgement stall. You tell someone something that matters, a win, a fear, a plan, and they say, oh, that's great, or I hear you, in a tone that lands flat. Not hostile, not rude, just thin. The words are correct, but the energy stops there. No follow-up question, no real pause. They've checked the box of politeness and moved on, often steering the talk back to themselves or safe territory within seconds. That immediate pivot is the whole story. Real interest creates friction. Good friction. When someone truly cares, they linger. They ask, tell me more, or what does that feel like, or what happens next? They create space for you to expand because they actually want to know. The stall, by contrast, is a redirect disguised as courtesy. It says, I've done my social duty. Now I'm moving the conversation to somewhere I'm more comfortable. Watch for the timing too. If there's a gap, even a beat, between your confession and their polite reply, that gap is them deciding whether to lean in. When they don't, the silence fills with their choice. You'll notice this most with people who are either uncomfortable with vulnerability, maybe they were raised that way, or they're self-protective, or genuinely don't see you as someone worth that effort. The sting isn't the "that's great." It's what comes after. It's the way they protect their energy from yours, how quickly they change the subject, whether they ever circle back to it later without prompting. Pay attention to who actually stays with you when things get tender, who asks the next question without being coached into it, who remembers what you said 3 days later and brings it up unprompted, who lets your moment breathe in the room. Those are your people. Everyone else is broadcasting something valuable about what they're willing to invest. If you're willing to read the channel, they're tuning out. The evaluative pause. You've just told someone something you're proud of. A win, a choice you made, a funny story. Their face goes still. There's a beat, just long enough that you feel the floor shift beneath you. That pause before they respond is them deciding what you're worth in their mind, running a quick calculation of whether this new information fits the person they already believe you to be. If it slots in neatly, the response comes fast and warm. If it doesn't, the pause stretches into something heavier, something that feels like they're grinding through the math of your inconsistency, even as they smile. That's the evaluative pause, and most people miss it entirely because we're trained to hunt for words, not silence. We think judgment lives in language. But silence is actually where the real story hides. When someone genuinely believes in you, they don't pause at all. Your wins land like good news from a trusted friend, not like contradictions they have to reconcile. The pause itself is their brain rewriting your character file to fit the new data, and character rewrites take time. They might smooth it over with a laugh or tack on a quick, "That's great," but you already felt the gap between your news and their belief in it. Here's what makes this stick. That pause isn't meanness. It's actually honesty before it gets dressed up. They're not pretending surprise they don't feel, not faking delight they haven't caught up to yet. They're just slow to update their file on you, and the space between your words and their response shows the lag like a shadow. The next time a reaction feels off, not in what someone actually says, but in that thin moment hanging before they say it, trust that feeling. That's you catching the true story, the one they haven't had time to smooth over or edit. The silence is where they live. The double take before answering. You ask someone a straightforward question, maybe, "Do you want to grab coffee?" or "What did you think of my idea?" And for a split second, their face does something small. Their eyes flick away. They pause. Their mouth opens, then closes. Then they answer. That micro hesitation, that tiny recalibration before they speak, is not a neutral pause. It is their brain running a calculation you are not supposed to see. They are deciding which version of the truth to tell you. Not whether to lie, necessarily, but which truth fits the relationship they think you have, or want to have, or are afraid of having. If someone likes you and trusts you, the answer usually comes fast and loose. There is no editing, but when there is friction, even unspoken friction, the delay shows up like a fingerprint. They are checking the temperature before they jump in, scanning for danger. Most people miss it entirely. They feel the weirdness afterward, the sense that something was off, but they do not trace it back to that moment. A double take is a social edit. It is proof that the first impulse, the true one, got vetted before it reached your ears. The real trap is mistaking this for thoughtfulness. Someone genuinely considering your question does not flicker, but someone protecting an answer, calculating how much you can handle, or unsure if they are safe enough to tell you what they actually think. That is where the double take lives. Watch for it the next time someone you care about hesitates before answering something personal. It does not always mean rejection. Sometimes it means they are protecting you or themselves, but it always means they are not giving you the unfiltered version. And if you notice it happening repeatedly with the same person, especially on small things, that is the real signal. It means you are not in the category of people they are fully themselves around. That matters to know. Delayed laughter. You tell a joke. Silence. Then, after a beat that feels like forever, they laugh. But it's arrived late, like someone running to catch a train that already pulled away. That lag is data. When someone genuinely finds you funny, their brain processes the humor, and the laugh comes almost as a reflex, fast and warm, before they can even think about it. The delay, though, often means they're doing arithmetic in their head first. Are they supposed to laugh? Is this a moment to show they're in on it with you? Do they actually find it funny? Or are they performing the social role of someone who does? Sometimes the delayed laugh comes because they didn't quite understand the joke and had to play it back in their mind, or because they're too tired or distracted to find anything genuinely amusing. Other times it arrives late because they're watching themselves be watched. They're not spontaneous with you, which means some part of them doesn't feel safe enough to just react without filtering. They're performing, calculating, holding back. Real connection usually shows up as fast laughter, the kind that escapes before they can think about it. The hesitation before the sound leaves their mouth is often the sound of calculation, not delight. Pay attention to whether the delayed laugh ever becomes faster as you spend more time together. If it slowly shifts from pause then laugh to immediate and genuine, trust is building. If it stays locked in that measured beat, they may be keeping some distance, protecting themselves, or deciding if you're worth the risk of being real. You don't need everyone to explode into laughter at your jokes, and not every pause means rejection. Sometimes people are just wired slower, or they're processing in their own way. But notice who laughs like they mean it, and who laughs like they're checking a box. That difference tells you who's actually with you, and who's still deciding whether it's safe to be. Anticipatory laughter before your joke. You're building up to a punchline. Maybe it's a story about something embarrassing that happened at work, or a silly observation about the way your friend always orders coffee. You pause. You haven't even delivered the payoff yet, and they're already laughing. Not a polite smile, not a nod that says, "I see where this is going." Actual laughter, the kind that starts before you've technically earned it. What you're watching is someone betting on you before the chips are down, and that's not nothing. Their brain is already primed to find you funny because they trust your comedic timing so deeply they don't need the whole setup to justify the reaction. They're preloaded with goodwill. This happens most with people who genuinely like you, who've internalized your sense of humor over time, who want you to succeed in the moment. They're rooting for the joke. The opposite is the person who sits stone-faced through your entire bit, waiting for permission to laugh until the crowd goes first, or who never laughs at all, no matter how hard you land it. That's someone keeping their emotional response on a leash, either because they don't know you well enough to relax, or because some part of them isn't rooting for your moment. But the anticipatory laugh, that's someone who's already decided you're worth their laughter, who's given you credit in advance. It's also a little generous. They're essentially giving you a head start, smoothing the path for your joke to land well. They're not making you work as hard for it. Over time, notice who does this with you and who makes you earn every single laugh from zero. The difference is about comfort, affection, and whether someone sees you as someone worth rooting for. That laugh before the punchline lands is them saying, "I'm in your corner." And when it stops, you might notice something shifting too. Eye contact after the punchline. You just landed a joke. For a split second, watch where their eyes go. Do they look at you first or at someone else in the room? That millisecond tells you more than their laugh ever will. When someone finds you genuinely funny, their eyes seek you out before they even process the humor. It's a reflex, a small nod of recognition. They're checking in with you, the source, the one they trusted, to make them feel good. But if they laugh and hold eye contact with a third person, or worse, look away entirely, something shifts. It doesn't mean the joke wasn't funny. It means the connection wasn't the point. They got the humor from the material, not from you. Scale this outward, and you start seeing the pattern everywhere. In conversations where someone really values you, eye contact after a punchline, or after you've shared something vulnerable, or said something clever, is how they're saying without words, "I'm glad you were the one to tell me that." It's the visceral difference between laughing at what you said and laughing with you, between enjoying the content and enjoying you. Some people are trained performers. They'll hold your gaze for effect, to appear engaged, but the involuntary glance is the true tell. A genuine spark makes people reach for you with their eyes first, almost before they're aware they're doing it. The faker locks in afterward, a beat too late, calculated rather than instinctive. Here's what changes everything. Next time someone laughs at something you've said, resist the urge to jump back into the conversation immediately. Hold still for just a breath. Were you the destination, or did they just happen to be looking your way? That single pause will teach you whether you're the person they like, or just the convenient person who made a sound they happen to enjoy. It's a small tell with surprising weight, and once you start watching for it, you'll recognize it in every room you walk into. The people who turn toward you when you shine, and the ones who turn toward the room. Duchenne versus social smiling. Watch someone's face the moment you walk into a room. If only their mouth moves upward and their eyes stay flat, you are looking at a social smile. The polite mask everyone learns by age 5. But if the corners of their eyes crinkle inward and their cheeks rise naturally, meeting that smile, that is the Duchenne smile. The difference is invisible unless you know where to look, yet it reveals almost everything about how someone actually feels in your presence. A Duchenne smile is almost impossible to fake because it requires muscles around the eyes that most of us cannot control on command. Your cheek muscles work fine. Your mouth works fine, but those tiny orbicularis oculi muscles, they fire only when genuine emotion runs through you. So when someone greets you with a real Duchenne smile, their nervous system just said yes before their brain had time to edit. The social smile is not dishonesty, exactly. It is diplomacy. It means, I am being civil, I am following the rules of this conversation, but it also means distance. It says I am performing friendliness rather than feeling it. You see this a lot in obligatory work conversations, family dinners, where tension simmers below the surface, or when someone is listening to a story they have heard before. The real tell is knowing which one you are getting from someone. If they light up with Duchenne smiles when you mention something that matters, they are tracking your inner life and holding space for what you say. If they default to social smiling, even when you share something vulnerable, they are managing you, not connecting with you. Neither is proof of anything final, but it is early data that shifts with time and trust. Pay attention to which smile someone saves for you versus the ones they hand out to everyone else in the room. That pattern is honest in a way words almost never are. The suppressed smile at your setback. You tell someone about a project that fell apart, a job offer that evaporated, a person who rejected you, and in that half second before they speak, their mouth twitches, not a full smile, but the ghost of one. Their lips press together just a beat too tight, and their eyes go a little bright. Then, the performance kicks in. Oh no, that's terrible. But you felt it, that flicker of pleasure at your pain. It is rarely malice in the clean sense. More often it is relief. Relief that it happened to you and not them. Relief that they are still standing while you stumbled. Relief that their own fragile standing in the world just got slightly more secure by comparison. We do not like admitting this about ourselves, so the smile gets buried. The face reorganizes. The condolences flow right on time. But here is what matters. That suppressed smile is not a lie about the emotion. It is evidence of it. And if someone regularly catches themselves enjoying your difficulty, even for a microsecond, it tells you something about how they actually see the hierarchy between you. They are not rooting for you to rise. They are quietly glad you fell. This is different from someone who feels scared for you, or uncomfortable, or even awkward. Those faces look different. Eyes soften, they lean in, the mouth opens slightly. The suppressed smile does the opposite. It contracts. It guards the pleasure like it is contraband. The hard move is not calling it out. It is accepting what you saw without needing them to confess it. Some people in your life will only feel okay if you are occasionally smaller than you are. That is information. It does not make them villains, but it does make them unreliable as genuine supporters. And once you see it happen even once, you know where you actually stand. Not in their corner, but on their scale, watching. Pay attention to who lights up when you struggle. Interruption asymmetry. You're 3 minutes into a story, and someone jumps in, not because they're rude, but because what you're saying doesn't feel worth the wait. Watch what happens next. Do they let you finish when it's their turn, or do you find yourself cutting short again? The asymmetry, when they interrupt you freely, but bristle if you do it back, is the real signal. It's not about manners. It's about whether your thoughts register as worth protecting. People protect airtime for people they value. They guard it fiercely. If someone interrupts you constantly, but gets visibly annoyed the moment you overlap their words, you're watching them signal that your input doesn't occupy the same mental real estate as theirs. It feels small because it happens fast in the gaps between words, but it compounds. Over weeks or months, the pattern hardens into something you feel in your chest, a sense that you're always rushing to fit in, that your thoughts are welcome only if they don't take up too much room. The inverse matters just as much. If someone lets you finish, even when they're excited to speak, if they ask follow-up questions instead of waiting for their turn, they're showing you something different. They're showing you that your words warrant their patience. They're choosing to sit with what you're saying, rather than grab the spotlight. The rhythm tells you everything. Who apologizes when they cut in? Who restarts your sentence to let you finish? Who leans forward instead of checking their phone mid-thought? Who leaves space for you to breathe? These tiny choreographies of attention and impatience add up to a map of how much real estate you actually occupy in someone's inner world. The interruption asymmetry isn't about who talked louder. It's about who acted like the other person's words were worth the silence. Next time you're talking to someone, pay attention not just to what they interrupt about, but to whether they ever seem to notice they did it at all. That noticing, or the absence of it, is the whole story. Overlapping speech with warmth. You're mid-sentence when someone jumps in, and instead of feeling cut off, you feel seen. They finish your thought or riff on it, their words tumbling over yours, not with aggression, but with genuine excitement. That overlap is a love language most people never name. It signals they're so engaged with what you're saying that they can't wait their turn, that your words are already landing in their brain before you've stopped speaking. Contrast this with the other kind of interruption, the kind where someone cuts you off to redirect the conversation to themselves, leaving dead air where your momentum was. The warm overlap feels like collaboration. It's yes and, the improv rule, not no, but. It happens naturally in conversations where both people are genuinely curious. Watch what they overlap about. Do they jump in to expand on your point, make a joke that builds on yours, or ask a follow-up question that proves they were listening? Or do they interrupt to disagree, minimize, or steer back to their own story? The timing matters too. A person who overlaps with warmth usually lets you land your main point first before the excitement takes over. They're not desperate to be heard, they're delighted to engage. If someone does this with you consistently, especially if they do it with the specific details you mention, they're mentally living in the space where you are. They're not performing interest, they're genuinely tracking what matters to you. The warning version. Some people mimic this pattern to seem engaged when they're actually rehearsing what they'll say next. The tell is what happens after their overlap. Does the thread stay with your story, or does it veer into theirs? Warmth that's real loops back. Fake warmth moves forward and away. Pay attention to whether they remember what they overlapped. About when you talk again next time. Real engagement builds memory. Performed engagement builds only momentum away from you. Listen for it next conversation and you'll hear the difference. Sentence completion attempts. Watch what happens the next time you pause mid-sentence. Do they jump in and finish it for you, or do they sit with the silence? That gap tells you something real about how closely they're tracking you. Someone who anticipates your words, who knows you're about to say, "I'm not sure if I should take the job," and nods like they already know the weight you're carrying. That's someone building a mental model of how your mind works. They've been listening long enough to predict the shape of your thoughts. But here's what makes this clue stick. The quality matters more than the frequency. Interrupting to finish your sentences can feel intimate when it lands right, like you're so in sync that language itself becomes redundant. It can also feel suffocating when someone does it to show off, or worse, when they get it wrong and you realize they've stopped actually hearing you and started hearing their version of you. The person who respects you waits. They let you stumble through the hard parts because they know the struggle is where meaning lives. They might offer a word if you're genuinely stuck, but they do it like a gift, not a correction. Watch too for the person who never attempts completion at all. They might be disengaged, or they might be giving you the rarest form of respect, the space to think out loud without audience. The clue isn't just about whether they finish your sentences, it's about whether they do it because they're inside your head, or because they're too impatient to let you live there. Pay attention, not just to the interruption itself, but to what happens after. Do they look pleased with themselves, or do they check your face to see if they got it right? That micro gesture separates someone who's showing off from someone who genuinely knows you. Next conversation, notice the pause before someone speaks. That tiny hesitation can mean they're choosing their words carefully instead of grabbing at yours. Speech rate convergence. Listen to a recording of yourself talking to someone you genuinely like, then play back a conversation with someone you're neutral about. Hear the difference. Most people don't catch it, but your mouth does. And their mouth mirrors yours within seconds. When you slow down slightly because someone matters, they slow down too. When you rush through words because you're anxious or dismissive, they pick up that tempo like a thermostat adjusting to heat. This mirroring happens below consciousness, which makes it brutally honest feedback about who you actually are to them. The tricky part is that speech rate convergence works both ways, and the direction tells you everything. If someone speeds up when you're together, they're often feeding off your energy, matching you because they're drawn in, engaged, tracking every word like it lands somewhere real. But if they maintain their own pace while you're naturally accelerating, they're not following your rhythm. They've stayed in their own lane. It's a small rebellion, barely noticeable in the moment, but it suggests they're not fully invested in the conversation's emotional flow. Pay attention next time you're talking to someone you wonder about. Are they matching your pace, or are you the one constantly adjusting yourself to be heard? Are they slowing down to meet you, or speeding past, like they've got somewhere better to be? The thing about speech rate is that it's nearly impossible to fake deliberately. Most people can't consciously control whether they sync with someone else's tempo. It happens automatically when the social brain says, "This person matters," or when it says, "I'm just waiting for my turn." The next move is to notice it without forcing anything yet. Don't manufacture convergence by artificially slowing down or speeding up. Just observe who naturally matches your rhythm and who doesn't. Over time, the pattern becomes a quiet read on who's genuinely tracking with you versus who's merely tolerating the conversation. That rhythm is real, and your body knows the truth before your mind does. Vocabulary downshift. Listen to how someone's language transforms the moment they're speaking to you, not because they're being deliberately false, but because their brain has silently made a calculation about how much cognitive effort you're worth. If someone normally speaks in sharp layered sentences with precise words and complex ideas, then drops into simpler structures around you, shorter words, fewer conjunctions, that's a signal worth sitting with. It's not malice. Usually, it's automatic. The brain allocates effort the way you might reach for easier words with a tired friend or a stranger at a checkout, based on how much receptiveness it senses. The real trap is that vocabulary downshift often feels like friendliness or kindness, like they're making things accessible for you, when it can quietly signal low expectations about your capacity or genuine interest in what you think. You'll catch it in real time if you listen closely enough. The person who challenges you with their full vocabulary, who doesn't dumb down their thinking, is treating your mind as actually worth engaging with. The flip side matters too. Watch for someone who suddenly cranks up the formality, the jargon, the $5 words around you. That can signal distancing, gatekeeping, or a desperate need to impress instead of connect. Either direction tells you something true. Here's the difficult part. Most people won't name this if you ask. They'll deny it flat out, but compare how they talk to their peers, their mentors, someone they clearly respect. Then notice the gap between that and how they talk to you. That gap is where the actual belief lives. If you feel patronized in a conversation and can't quite pin down why, check the vocabulary first. Chances are strong someone made a snap judgment about you and quietly downshifted. The question then becomes whether you want to challenge that gently by showing you're actually tracking them, or whether you let them keep believing what they've already decided. Both are valid moves. Choose the one that protects you better. Mirroring of posture. Sit across from someone you know well and notice what happens to their body without them thinking about it. If you lean forward, do they lean forward too? If you cross your legs, does theirs follow a beat later? That unconscious echo is not random. It's the body's way of saying, I'm with you, I get this. Neuroscience calls it mirroring, but what matters is what it means in real time. People mirror the people they feel safe with, the ones they are actually tracking. Your friend at the coffee shop who keeps their shoulders locked away while you talk. They are not mirroring you. Their posture stays its own island. That tells you something quietly true. Maybe they are uncomfortable, maybe distracted, maybe they do not trust the moment. The trick is that mirroring is usually invisible to both people. You are not consciously tilting your head because they tilted theirs. They are not thinking, now I will reflect his arm position. It just happens when there is rapport, when the nervous system recognizes a safe person. So when it does not happen, when you open your body and they keep theirs closed, when you relax into the chair and they stay braced, that gap is information. It does not mean they dislike you. It means something in them is not settled with you right now. The reverse is equally telling. If someone mirrors you constantly, but their words feel cold or distant, their body is trying to like you even if their mind has not caught up. The mirroring might lag too. They copy you 5 seconds later instead of 2, which often signals they are working harder to connect. That ease has not quite landed. Pay attention to what stays rigid. Posture does not lie the way words sometimes do. It tells you who is actually with you and who is just going through the motions. And that truth rarely changes across a single conversation. The abrupt formality shift. You're texting someone and it's been casual. Lowercase, emoji, the quick back and forth rhythm of real connection. Then suddenly a message lands in full sentences, proper punctuation, maybe your full name instead of a nickname. The shift happens fast, and it usually means something just changed in how they see you or what they need from you in that moment. People don't accidentally flip from LOL okay to thank you for your understanding without a reason buried underneath. That formality is often a moat, a way of putting professional distance between you when they've decided the warmth needs to pause. It's not always hostile. Sometimes they're hurt and need to protect themselves. Sometimes you've stepped into territory that feels unsafe, and they're signaling a boundary by switching codes. Sometimes they're angry, but trying not to show it, so they weaponize grammar like a shield, turning punctuation into a wall. The trickier part is that formality also hides what they're actually feeling. It's a way of removing themselves from the conversation emotionally while staying physically present in it. You'll notice they stop asking about your day, stop volunteering their own small moments, and their responses get shorter, even as the sentences grow longer and more carefully constructed. They're there, but not there. If you've been close to someone and suddenly feel that freeze creeping in, it's worth asking yourself what happened right before, not to fix it perfectly, but to understand whether you've crossed something they care about or whether they're protecting themselves from something you triggered without meaning to. The clock rarely resets on its own. If the closeness mattered to both of you, someone has to name the shift out loud and ask what's true, and ask it before the distance hardens into habit. Pay attention to when the formality arrives. It's usually the first signal that trust just took a small step backward, and ignoring it only lets the cold spread wider. Pronoun drift from we to you. Listen to how someone's language shifts when they're pulling away. Early in a conversation or relationship, people who feel connected use we. We should grab dinner. We could try that place. We always laugh about this. It's the pronoun of alliance, the sound of someone writing themselves into your story. But something happens when the temperature drops. The we slowly vanishes. Suddenly, they're saying, you should do that, or you might want to consider. The subject changes from shared ground to you, alone, off to the side. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes you won't even notice until you replay the conversation later and realize they stopped assuming you two were moving in the same direction. They've mentally stepped back and started treating you like a separate entity, making separate choices. Here's what matters. People don't usually police their pronouns consciously. They're just reflecting the mental map they're building in real time. If someone still says we when describing future plans, even small ones, there's an assumption of continuity underneath. But when they switch to you, they've already made a quiet decision. They're observing your choices now, not making them alongside you. It's not cruelty usually. It's just the linguistic footprint of someone mentally opting out. Pay attention, especially to moments when they could have used we and didn't, when talking about weekend plans, handling a shared problem, or next steps. Notice too if the shift happens only with you, or if they still use we with others. That small pronoun tells you whether they're still writing themselves into your future. If you catch yourself doing this with someone, pause and ask why. Are you actually checking out, or just protecting yourself because you sense they already have? The word choice is doing heavy lifting in the background, and it's almost always honest in ways people's words aren't. A tiny grammatical whisper that says more than any conversation ever could. Tag question softening. You say something firm, then you hear yourself add a tiny question at the end. That's what I think, isn't it? Or, we should probably leave soon, right? That little upturn of doubt tacked onto a statement looks like a genuine question, but it is not. It is a permission slip, a tiny verbal genuflection that says, I hope this is okay to say. Someone who respects your thinking does not need one. They land the sentence and wait. They do not soften the landing. Someone who is working hard to not offend you, or who suspects you might push back, adds that tag. It is the difference between I disagree and I disagree. Isn't that fair? One person is standing on solid ground. The other is standing on one foot, ready to step back. Listen for the pattern. If someone tags questions onto their opinions around you, but not around others, they are adjusting downward. They have learned something about how you receive directness, and they are hedging. The nervous parent uses tag questions with their critical adult child. The junior colleague uses them with the boss they do not quite trust. The partner uses them when they have been shut down before. Some people are natural tag question speakers, so frequency matters more than presence. But if someone shifts, tags their words only around you, or only when discussing certain topics, that shift is loud. They are signaling a wall they sense between you. Watch too for the inverse. Someone who never softens around you, who lands every sentence flat, who never checks in or adjusts. That is its own message, quieter perhaps, but just as revealing. The reframe is gentle but crucial. Softening your statements is not politeness, it is self-protection. It is someone making themselves smaller so you will not reject them. That is not disrespect. It is caution, and caution whispers a truth. They believe this relationship has a cost, and they are trying to pay it in small, undetectable installments. The verbal shrug. You tell someone about a goal you've been working toward for months. They say, yeah, sure, whatever works, and move on. No follow-up question, no real engagement, just linguistic shoulder drop, and suddenly the temperature in the conversation drops. That flat, whatever, is not agreement. It's dismissal wrapped in 3 syllables. The verbal shrug happens when someone doesn't actually care enough to pretend anymore, or when they've already decided your thing doesn't matter. It's the vocal equivalent of looking at their phone mid-sentence. What makes it so telling is the contrast with how people talk about things they genuinely value. When someone cares, they ask. They push back. They remember details. They bring it up later. The verbal shrug does none of that. Instead, it's, I heard you, and I'm going to forget this 30 seconds from now. Some people weaponize it too. There's a particular coldness to do whatever you want when said with that flat, don't care tone. It's not freedom. It's an exit sign. The tricky part is that people sometimes use verbal shrugs when they're tired or distracted, not actually indifferent. But here's what separates a casual moment from a pattern. Watch whether they come back to it. Do they ask how it went? Do they reference something you said? Do they text you a random article about your project? If the verbal shrug shrug is followed by genuine curiosity later, they were just tired. If it's followed by nothing, silence, never mentioned again, no follow-through, then you know where you actually rank in their attention. The verbal shrug is easy to miss because it sounds like agreement, almost like a yes, but it's the sound of someone checking out, and your gut usually knows the difference before your brain does. Pay attention to how they say yes, and more importantly, pay attention to what comes after. Their next move will tell you whether that sure meant something, or whether it was just the sound of the door closing. Silence tolerance level. You finish a story at dinner and nobody jumps in. 3 seconds pass. 5, 10. Watch what happens next. That's where the truth lives. If someone you care about sits with that silence without squirming, without reaching for their phone, without filling it with a nervous joke or a redirected topic, they are comfortable with you. Real comfort with another person is the ability to let a sentence end and not panic that the connection is breaking. Most people can't do it. They rush to fill space because silence feels like evidence of failure, like proof the other person is bored or angry or done with them. So they talk faster, louder, redirect to safer ground. But someone who genuinely likes you or respects you doesn't experience silence as threat. They let it breathe. They might even welcome it, a moment to actually hear what you said, to think before responding, to just be near you without performing. The flip side matters too. Notice who fills every pause with their own story, their own problem, their own need to be heard. That's not rudeness always. Sometimes it's anxiety or habit, but it's also information. It says they are not curious about the space you just made. They are not wondering what you might say next. They are not comfortable unless they are controlling the sound. Pay attention to the person who can ask you something, listen to your answer, and then sit with it. Who doesn't immediately twist your words into a platform for their own thing? Who lets your silence be real before they speak again? That person is rare, and they are showing you something precious. The ability to be genuinely present, not just audibly there. What happens when you stop talking is a window into how someone actually experiences being with you. The next time you notice someone who rushes every silence, ask yourself whether they are running from you or from themselves, and whether you want to keep performing for someone who cannot afford to be still. The topic pivot away from you. You're mid-sentence about something that matters to you. A win at work, a worry that's been sitting in your chest, a story from your weekend, and you watch them glance at their phone, shift their weight, or suddenly remember they need to tell you about their own thing instead. The conversation doesn't pause to acknowledge what you said. It just redirects, like you were a highway exit they didn't need to take. This is different from someone asking follow-up questions or building on your idea. A genuine listener leans in, asks what happened next, wants the details. They sit with the weight of what you're carrying. But a pivot away is a small door closing. They heard you, maybe, but they didn't want to go where you were taking them. And that matters because it tells you something honest about their interest in your inner world. Not in a cruel way, necessarily, but in a real one. Sometimes it's circumstance. People are tired, distracted, dealing with their own noise. But when it happens repeatedly, when your stories consistently get the conversational equivalent of a polite nod before the subject changes, that's a pattern, and patterns reveal priorities. If someone thinks you're worth investing in, they make room for what's happening inside you. They don't just wait for their turn to talk. The trickier part is that many people don't even notice they're doing it. It's automatic, almost reflexive. Your vulnerability meets their discomfort or indifference, and the conversation just pivots. No malice, no calculation. Just a small, repeated choice to stay at the surface. Watch for where the pivots happen. Is it only certain topics, only with one person, or does it tell you something wider about how seen you actually are in that space? Sometimes a pivot is just a bad moment. But a pattern of pivots, that consistent redirecting, that shortage of follow-up questions when you need them most, is information about whether someone is building toward knowing you or just passing through. That's worth knowing, and it's worth trusting what you feel when it keeps happening. Enthusiasm decay across the story. Watch what happens mid-story when someone is telling you about their weekend or something that touched them. They start electric, eyes bright, voice climbing like they're building towards something real and worth your time. Then, halfway through, You feel the shift. The words flatten. They rush the ending instead of savoring it, like they've suddenly decided the payoff isn't worth the breath. That fizzle is data, and it's louder than anything they could say directly. Energy doesn't evaporate by accident. It drains the moment a storyteller realizes their audience isn't mirroring their investment back. You've seen it happen across a dinner table when someone notices the room has gone polite instead of warm. That micro-rejection moves through their nervous system, and they downshift without conscious thought. This is different from a story that's genuinely poorly paced or boring. This is about the narrator reading the room in real time and losing faith. When someone respects or loves you, they tend to hold the energy, even through a winding tale, because they trust it'll land, that you're actually there, and not just waiting for your turn. But uncertainty about whether you actually like them shows up as enthusiasm decay. A quiet surrender mid-sentence where they realize they're speaking to someone who's politely tolerating them, not someone present. Maybe you were scrolling. Maybe your eyes drifted toward the door. Maybe you've been sharp with them lately, and they registered it. Their voice registers it too. But here's where it gets thorny. This runs both directions. If someone you care about loses steam mid-story with you, it might not mean they're cooling on you. It might mean they've learned from hard experience that you're not safe for this particular thing, so they self-protect by pulling back first. The real clue isn't just the decay itself, but which stories die. That pattern tells you what they've learned not to trust you with. Story-topping reflex. You tell someone about a terrible meeting at work, how your boss shut down your idea in front of the whole team. Before you finish, they jump in. Oh man, that reminds me of this time when I got demolished in a presentation. Now, your meeting isn't the story anymore. Theirs is. You're listening instead of being heard. This reflex, the need to trump your story with a bigger, worse, or more dramatic version of their own, is a tell. It signals that your moment just became raw material for their moment, not because they're cruel, but because they cannot sit with the simple fact that you matter enough to just listen. The story-topping reflex masquerades as connection. Someone might even believe they're bonding with you by sharing a parallel tale. But there's a difference between "that happened to me too" and "here's what I learned" and "your story was interesting, but wait until you hear mine." One holds space, the other colonizes it. Watch for the timing. Does their story land while your feelings are still wet? Do they let you finish or interrupt mid-sentence because they can't hold back? Does their version somehow always eclipse yours? More extreme, more dramatic, more deserving of airtime? People who genuinely care leave room for your experience to exist in its own weight class. They don't need to win the suffering Olympics. They can sit with you in something ordinary and difficult without needing to prove theirs was harder. The pattern matters more than any single incident. One story top might be thoughtlessness. A person who does this every time is showing you their map of the relationship. Your life is interesting only insofar as it reflects something about theirs. If someone consistently tops your stories, they're revealing something worth seeing. Your interior life is not quite real to them until it becomes a mirror for theirs. That's not friendship. That's a person using you as a stage, and knowing the difference is how you protect your attention. The one-upping consolation. You tell someone close to you about a hard day, a mistake at work, a rejection, something that stung. They listen for maybe 10 seconds, nod, and then pivot. Yeah, that's rough, but let me tell you what happened to me yesterday. Suddenly, your struggle is the setup for their story. You're not being comforted, you're being benchmarked. And the weird part? They might genuinely think they're helping. They think showing you they've had it worse is supposed to make you feel less alone. It doesn't. It makes you feel smaller, like your pain just became an opening act for theirs. When someone truly cares about you, they sit with your hard thing first. They ask questions. They let you have the weight of it for a moment. No rush to fix it. No need to prove their own suffering is bigger. The one-upping consoler, though, is already calculating how their version is bigger, sadder, more complicated. It's a tell, not necessarily that they dislike you, but that they're more interested in managing the conversation than managing your feelings. They're uncomfortable with simply witnessing someone else's pain without making it about themselves, so they redirect it into a comparison game nobody asked to play. Sometimes it's insecurity masquerading as empathy. Sometimes it's a genuine gap in how they were raised to listen. Their families might have operated on a competitive pain scale where only the worst story got airtime. But here's what matters. Pay attention to who does this and who doesn't, because the gap is real and it absolutely matters. The people who let you have your moment without immediately countering it with theirs, those are the ones who actually see you. They're not keeping score, they're not proving anything, and when the tables turn and you're the one listening, you'll notice the difference, because they taught you what it feels like to be truly heard, and that becomes the blueprint for how you show up for others. The status-restoring anecdote. You just mentioned something you're proud of, a promotion, a win, a small thing that mattered. Watch what happens next in the conversation. Does the other person let it live there for a moment, ask you about it, celebrate the specific details, or do they pause, nod briefly, and then immediately launch into a story about themselves? Something almost identical, but slightly better, slightly harder won, somehow more impressive? That pattern is called the status-restoring anecdote, and it's one of the most honest tells in human speech. What it means is simple. You just made them feel smaller, and they needed to remind themselves, and you, that they're still in the room. Not everyone does this. People who genuinely like you or feel secure around you can listen to your win without needing to outdo it. They might share a related story eventually, sure, but there's no urgency underneath it, no competitive edge. The status-restoring version has teeth. It lands fast. It's designed to erase the moment where you were the center of something good. In professional settings, watch for this during meetings when someone presents a new idea or takes credit for something. In relationships, it shows up when vulnerability gets met with a counter-vulnerability that's somehow always a little bigger. The trap is mistaking it for normal conversation. Sometimes people are just enthusiastic, just eager to connect. But when it happens every single time you speak, when you can almost feel the person recalibrate and recover, that's real data. It tells you they're not rooting for you to win, they're rooting for the score to stay even. That doesn't make them evil. It just means the relationship has a current running underneath it, one where you're not quite safe to shine. The people worth watching are the ones who let you be proud without flinching. They're keeping score of something entirely different, and that's the kind of person worth staying close to. The advice interruption. You're mid-sentence about something hard, and before you finish, they're already offering a fix, not asking what you need, not sitting with the weight of it. Just, here's what you should do. Now, sometimes that person is genuinely trying to help, genuinely wants to move you towards solution, but there's a tell hiding in the timing. When someone respects you, they usually let you land your thought first. They ask before they advise. They give you the floor long enough to actually explain what's tangled, what hurts, what you're turning over in your head at 3 in the morning. The quick interrupt and fix move says something quieter underneath. I'm not interested in your full picture. I'm interested in being right, in showing you I'm smart, in proving my value by solving what you haven't solved yet. It can also mean, and this one stings, I don't think you're capable of figuring this out yourself, so let me do it for you. There's a kind of condescension baked into advice before understanding, a subtle message that your thinking isn't enough. You know how it feels when someone lets you completely unfold a problem, asks real questions that actually matter, sits with the confusion for a minute, and then thoughtfully offers an angle you hadn't considered. That person is saying something entirely different. I trust that you're thinking. I want to understand your world first, before I offer anything. Totally different conversation, totally different feeling. The clue isn't about whether they eventually offer advice. People who care about you will give advice. It's about whether they made room for you to be fully heard before they did, whether they treated your unfolding as something worth listening to, rather than a problem waiting to be cleaned up. Pay attention to who lets you speak in full sentences about your own life, who doesn't rush to fix before they've really known. That distinction is where respect lives, and it shows up long before the hard conversations even begin. Correcting your minor errors. You say a date wrong, off by a year, and watch what happens next. Does the person let it slide, jump in gently to set the record straight, or maybe they don't say anything at all, just nod along like they didn't notice? That micro moment tells you a lot. When someone corrects your small factual slip-ups without being asked, especially in a low-stakes conversation, they're usually signaling something underneath the surface. Sometimes it's helpfulness, a straightforward person who values accuracy and assumes you'd want to know. But sometimes, especially if the correction comes with a particular tone or timing, it's a quiet assertion of authority or superiority. They're saying, I noticed you were wrong, I know better, and I'm going to make sure you, and everyone else, knows it. The real tell isn't the correction itself, it's the gentleness or sharpness that wraps around it. A warm, oh, I think it was actually 2019, lands totally different than, no, that's not right. It was 2019. One feels like someone helping, the other feels like someone keeping score. Pay attention to whether they correct you consistently or selectively. Some people will let small errors slide with friends they genuinely like, saving their precision for moments when accuracy actually matters. Others correct everything, which sometimes means they're anxious, sometimes means they're controlling, and sometimes just means they're pedantic. But here's what matters most. Someone who respects you usually gives you the benefit of the doubt on minor details. They assume you know more than you're saying, or that the mistake doesn't matter to the conversation. Someone who doesn't quite trust or value you sees each error as a chance to prove they're paying attention and that they're sharper. Watch whether the correction feels like a gift or a small power move. That feeling, more than the words themselves, is what reveals how they actually see you and whether they're rooting for you or just for themselves. The correction tolerance test. You say something slightly wrong in a conversation, misremember a date, mix up a detail, mispronounce a name. Watch what happens next. Does the person gently offer the right version and move on? Do they ignore it entirely? Or do they stop, correct you directly, and wait for acknowledgement? That reaction tells you something sharp about how they actually perceive you. People who genuinely respect you tend to offer corrections lightly, almost as a gift, a whispered fix that lets you keep your dignity. They're invested in you getting it right, not in being right themselves. But someone who doesn't quite see you as an equal, they often correct you more pointedly, sometimes with a tiny edge. They need you to know they caught it. They need the moment of correction to register and stick. The texture matters, a soft redirect versus a hard stop. And people who really don't think much of you at all might correct you repeatedly or bring up the mistake later in front of others to prove they were paying attention, which is less about helping and more about keeping score. The subtle version is when someone corrects you only in front of others. Alone, they'd let it slide entirely. That's a pure status play, a way of establishing hierarchy when witnesses are watching. What makes this test so revealing is that corrections happen fast, almost reflexively. There's no time to perform. Most people don't consciously think, now I will correct this person in a way that reflects my true opinion. It just leaks out, unfiltered. The way someone handles your small mistake is how they handle you when the stakes don't require strategy. So the next time someone corrects you, whether it's gentle, blunt, repeated, or carefully timed, notice the texture of it. Not what they said, but how they said it and to whom. That small choice, repeated across dozens of conversations, draws a map of where you actually sit in their world. It's one of the least faked tells in any human interaction. Disagreement in front of others. Watch what happens the moment you get something wrong and there's an audience. A restaurant choice, a detail in a story, how much time you spent together last week. Something small enough that it barely matters, except it does, because now 5 other people heard it. Your person has a choice in that second. Do they soften, give you an out, let you retreat with your dignity still intact? Or do they lean in harder, correct you sharply? Maybe even turn it into a little performance for the room? The instinct tells you everything their careful words never will. Someone who carries real care for you feels the weight of that audience and adjusts. They disagree, sure, people do. But they make space for you to be wrong without being humiliated. Oh, I remember it differently, but you might be right. Or they table it, bring it up later, one-on-one, where nobody's watching. But someone who doesn't quite see you as their equal, they use the audience like leverage. They correct you the way you'd correct a child, like your version of events is laughable. Maybe build a joke around it. Not always cruel, just careless. The difference sits in whether they understand that being wrong in front of others hits different than being wrong alone. Dignity matters, and most people know it. The gap between someone who protects that gap and someone who weaponizes it is massive, and it shows in a single unguarded moment. When that awkward landing hits and they choose their response, you're not just learning how they disagree, you're learning whether they think of you as someone worth protecting or someone they don't mind watching shrink a little. That unguarded impulse, that split-second choice of whether to build you back up or let the room do the work for them, it's the truest thing they'll show you. Rehearsed kindness is easy to fake. How they treat you when you're visibly wrong and the world is listening. That's the honest answer. The subject change, rescue, your mid-story, something that actually matters to you. Voice may be rising a little, and halfway through they pivot. Smooth, casual. Oh hey, did you see that new show? Or, speaking of that, my cousin just got back from... and the spotlight swings away. Most people call it disinterest and move on, but there's a sharper move buried in there, the subject change rescue, and it's worth your attention because it reveals something specific about how safe they feel around your feelings. Here's the thing, when someone abandons your story partway through, it's not always because they don't care about you. Sometimes they care just enough to panic. Maybe you're getting teary, maybe you're venting about someone they like or respect. Maybe the story is slowly painting you in a light that makes them uncomfortable, angry, needy, falling apart, and they're not equipped to sit in that without needing to escape. So they throw a life raft, a new topic, a redirect. It feels smooth, but it's actually a boundary. And it's the boundary of someone who's still negotiating how much of your real mess they want to hold. People do this most with people whose approval still matters. They want to keep liking you, so they save you from spiraling deeper into the feelings they can't stomach. If someone lets you spiral fully into vulnerability or frustration without flinching, if they stay in the discomfort with you, they're either genuinely comfortable with the full spectrum of human emotion, or they've already made their peace with you, and your struggles won't change anything. The subject change rescue is different. It's the move of someone caught in the middle, not distant enough to not care, not close enough to wade in. Next time it happens, pause and ask yourself, is this person protecting themselves from me or managing their own discomfort by protecting me from drowning them in it? The answer won't end the friendship, but it will clarify what kind of friendship it actually is. That clarity is everything. The unasked for defense. You mentioned something small. Maybe that you stayed in bed late, or that you ordered takeout instead of cooking, and suddenly they're listing reasons why that's actually fine, actually smart, actually justified. You didn't ask them to defend you. You weren't even looking for approval, but there it comes anyway, unsolicited and a little too thorough. What's happening here is subtle but telling. They're doing emotional labor you didn't request, which means they're managing something in themselves, not responding to something in you. People who genuinely don't care what you do don't sprint to defend your choices. They might listen, nod, move on, but the unasked for defense is different. It's a kind of preemptive reassurance, a way of saying, I'm on your team before you've asked them to pick a side. Sometimes this comes from real warmth, from someone who knows you carry shame and wants to lighten the load. But watch for the flavor of it. Does it feel protective, or does it feel like they're nervous about what you might think of them if they don't jump in fast enough? Does it seem like generosity, or like they're uncomfortable with any silence or any hint that you might judge yourself? The distinction matters because one is about you, and the other is about them managing their own anxiety around your judgment. The stickier version is when they defend you against criticisms nobody made. Your boss was probably just stressed. They definitely don't think you're incompetent. Before you've said you felt incompetent, that's them writing the script of what your insecurity should be, which tells you they've already decided how you see yourself. It's not a sign they dislike you, but it is a sign they're not quite tracking who you actually are in the moment. They're responding to a version of you they've already constructed, already worry about, already need to protect. Pay attention to whether their defenses match what you actually said or what they imagine you're feeling underneath. Diminutive framing of your work. You finish a project and mention it to someone you respect. They nod and say, "Oh, that's cute," or "That's a nice little hobby," or "It's sweet that you're trying." Pause there. That word choice is not neutral territory. Cute, little, trying. These are size reducers. They are taking something you built and shrinking it in the room with their language, compressing it down to something manageable in their mental map of who deserves respect. When someone genuinely believes in your work, they describe it in scale. They say, "You did that? That's solid." They lean in. They ask how long it took, what's next, how you solved the hard parts. They treat it like a thing that exists, not a toy to smile at. The diminutive frame is different. It's a quiet way of saying your effort doesn't belong in the same category as work that matters. A doctor doesn't describe a colleague's research as cute. A publisher doesn't call a writer's manuscript a nice little project. When those words land on your work, it signals that the person has already decided there is a gap between what you do and what counts. Sometimes it comes from discomfort, from not understanding your field, so they shrink it to something safer in their mind. Sometimes it's envy dressed up as kindness. Sometimes it's just the honest sound of someone deciding you're not in their league. The real trap is not tracking the pattern. You might brush it off, laugh it away, tell yourself they meant well in the moment. But start listening, whether this person uses that framing consistently, whether they speak about your peers the same way, whether the language shifts when they want something from you or when you've just done something they can't dismiss. Your work doesn't change weight based on how they describe it, but their actual respect shows up right there, hiding in plain sight in the size of their words. Stark. Damning with faint praise. You showed your friend a piece of writing you're proud of. They read it and said, "Wow, you actually finished something. That's impressive." Your stomach drops a little, even though they smiled. Nothing was objectively insulted. The words are technically positive, but you felt it anyway. That's faint praise, and it cuts sharper than outright criticism, because it's wrapped in deniability. The real skill is watching the gap between what someone says and how they say it. Your coworker gives a presentation. Later, someone mentions, "He was so confident up there," when what they mean is confident but hollow. Your date tells you, "You're so unique," when they mean, "Not my type, but I'm being polite." The genius of faint praise is you can't quite pin someone down for it. If you call it out, they'll say, "I was complimenting you," and technically they were. But you both felt the temperature drop. Pay attention to the pause before the positive. Notice when someone qualifies a strength with surprise. "You're actually good at this," because that embedded shock rewrites the whole message. Listen for comparisons that diminish. "Better than I expected." Watch for praise that lands on effort or intention rather than results, because that's how people soften disappointment without saying so directly. The inverse tells you everything. People who genuinely believe in you don't sprinkle their compliments with shock or caveats. They build on what you do. They remember details. They assume you'll do well next time without needing to say it out loud. They don't need the velvet wrapping because they mean what they say. If someone consistently reaches for praise as a wrapper around doubt, they're telling you exactly where you stand. And it's not high. The human instinct is to be socially smooth, so people soften what they really think by leading with something nice. But the wrapping always shows a seam if you're listening closely enough to hear what's underneath. Hedged endorsements. Your friend sees your new business idea and says, "That's interesting. I mean, you're clearly passionate about it." Feel the difference? A real endorsement doesn't need a pause, a qualifier, or the word "clearly" doing the heavy lifting. What you're hearing is someone scrambling to be kind while protecting their actual opinion. Hedged endorsements are the conversational equivalent of a polite no wrapped in the language of a yes, so it won't sting. "You're really brave" often means, "That seems risky." "I love your energy" can mean, "I don't understand your choices, but I respect you trying." "That's bold" is a classic. It sidesteps judgment by naming only the act of doing something different, not whether it's good. The real tell isn't that they're lying, it's that they're working too hard. Someone who genuinely believes in you doesn't need the buffer. They say, "This is smart," or "I want to help," or "I'm genuinely excited for you." No hedge, no softening, no extra words buying themselves time to think. The hedged version needs that friction because the person is holding two feelings at once and using language to keep both alive. The desire to support you and the private doubt they don't want to voice. This cuts through the performance because people hedge endorsements when they care enough about the relationship not to be brutal, but not enough about your idea to risk their own credibility on it. They're threading a needle, and you hear it in the seams. The trap is mistaking their caution for wisdom. You might nod and think they're being measured or kind, but what's actually happening is they're protecting themselves. Watch what happens next time someone praises you with a pause, an "I mean," or a qualifier. Your instinct might say they're being thoughtful, but that instinct is wrong. They're being careful. There's a difference, and it matters. Someone who actually believes in you doesn't need to build an escape route into their compliment. The confidence is naked. The words are plain. You won't need to decode anything. Compliment specificity. Someone tells you that you're so talented and moves on. Another person says, "The way you caught that contradiction in the meeting, nobody else would have heard it the same way." Feel the difference. The first one could be something they say to anyone. The second one means they were actually watching you, thinking about you, noticing the particular shape of how you work. Generic praise is often a social lubricant. Quick, painless, costs nothing. Specific praise requires attention. It means someone had to pause and think, what exactly did this person do that mattered? What did I actually see? When someone goes vague, "You're great," you always know what to say. "Everyone loves you." They might genuinely like you, but they're not really seeing you. They're seeing a role you play or a feeling you give them. The specificity gap shows whether they've built an actual picture of who you are, or if they're just running on surface-level warmth. Watch what happens when you ask them to elaborate. Thanks. What do you mean? If they can drill down fast and stay precise, you've got someone paying real attention. If they stall, backtrack, or go even more general, just everything, that's your signal. They weren't looking close enough to remember the details. The stakes are small in a compliment, sure, but they're revealing. People don't waste the energy of specificity on someone they don't care about understanding. They save the vague stuff for the people they like in theory, but don't actually know. Here's what matters. The compliment that lands hardest is the one that couldn't be copy-pasted. So the next time someone compliments you, don't just feel warm. Listen close. Are they complimenting what you did or who you are? Are they naming something only you could have done? Or could they say this to 3 other people this week? That's where the truth lives. The detail is the proof that someone is paying attention to you, not just to the version of you they need in that moment. The compliment sandwich habit. You've noticed it before. Someone wraps criticism in praise like a gift, and you're left confused about whether they actually meant the nice part or just needed a sugarcoating for the sting. Your presentation was so creative, but honestly, the data side fell flat, and I really respect how hard you tried anyway. That structure matters more than you'd think. When someone genuinely thinks well of you, compliments arrive without agenda. They show up unguarded, sometimes even awkwardly enthusiastic, the kind of praise that doesn't feel like it was waiting for permission to exist. But the sandwich, compliment, criticism, compliment, that's often a sign someone is managing your feelings rather than sharing honest reactions. They're hedging. They're afraid that if they don't cushion the blow with praise, you'll either dismiss them or get upset, which means they don't actually trust you to hear hard things without falling apart. The sandwich strategy reveals someone who sees you as fragile or defensive, someone who needs protecting from the truth. That's not meanness. It's actually its own form of distance, a small wall made of kindness. A person who thinks highly of you and trusts your character will often just say what they think. This didn't work lands differently than, I loved the effort. This didn't work. You're great. One assumes you can handle reality, the other assumes you can't. Notice too when the compliments feel generic. You're so dedicated, wrapped around specific criticism. That's a different animal from genuine praise that's tangled up in real observation. The telltale sign is how tightly the compliment relates to the actual feedback. If it's substantive and specific to what you actually did, it might be honest. If it's vague or platitudinal, it's insulation. Next time you hear the sandwich, pause and ask yourself, did they praise something I actually care about, or did they just need me to feel okay before the truth landed? That answer tells you everything about what they're actually thinking underneath and whether they believe you're strong enough to hear them straight. Flattery timed to requests. You ask someone for help, and suddenly they remember how talented you are. You need a favor, and that's when they tell you how much they value your opinion. The timing itself is the tell. Real admiration lives in the mundane moments. The Tuesday afternoon, when nothing's being asked of you, when praise costs them nothing, but flattery that arrives on cue, right before the ask lands, moves to a different rhythm entirely. It's less about how they actually see you, and more about what they need from you in that specific moment. Think about the last time someone complimented you hard and fast, right before pivoting to, so anyway, I have something I want to talk to you about. Did the praise feel true, or did it feel like lubrication? Your gut usually knows the difference. What makes this clue so reliable is that it reveals the operative logic. They're not celebrating who you are. They're priming you to say yes. They've learned that a warm feeling before the request makes you less likely to resist it. It's not necessarily cruel or calculating in the Hollywood sense. Sometimes people do this half-consciously, just following the muscle memory of social transactions. But the pattern matters. Someone who genuinely respects you will scatter praise throughout your relationship, not just when they want something. They'll tell you you're thoughtful when you're just sitting there. They'll mention your humor on a random Thursday. Flattery without an agenda is music. Flattery with timing is a signal. The rhythm tells you everything, whether someone sees you as a person or as a tool they're trying to unlock. So the next time someone compliments you and then almost immediately pivots to needing something, don't ignore the sequence. You're not being rude or paranoid to notice it. You're just reading what they're actually saying beneath the words, that they're trying to get you to yes, and they're using your own good qualities as the mechanism to do it. That knowledge, once you have it, changes how the whole conversation lands. Praise routed through third parties. You do something good and you're proud, but instead of hearing it straight from them, word filters back to you sideways. Your friend mentions that someone said you handled that project brilliantly. Or your partner hears from a coworker that you were kind. That's the setup. And it lands strange, doesn't it? There's warmth in the words, but a peculiar distance in how they traveled, like the compliment had to take a detour to reach you. Here's what that gap reveals. Genuine admiration typically takes the shortest path. When someone truly thinks you're wonderful, they tell you directly. They look you in the eye. They skip the middleman because the feeling feels too immediate, too real to let sit and cool before delivery. But when praise travels sideways, through rumors, echoes, someone mentioned, third-party confirmations, it signals a different calculation happening underneath. Maybe they're uncomfortable with direct intimacy and vulnerability. Maybe they wanted credit for recognizing your quality, but couldn't tolerate the exposure of saying it aloud themselves. Or maybe, and this matters more than you'd think, they needed witnesses. They needed proof that they are the kind of person who appreciates good things. So they routed the compliment through an audience, rather than give it to you alone, where there would be no one to validate their generosity, except you. It's the difference between being valued and being used as evidence in someone else's story. The pattern is worth noticing. How often does praise come unfiltered versus how often does it take a scenic route through other people's mouths? Someone who genuinely thinks the world of you will eventually get tired of waiting for the perfect moment. They'll just tell you, messy and direct. When the third-party route becomes the habit, you're often watching someone protect themselves from the real exposure that comes with giving something freely, with no witnesses but you. It feels like love at first glance, but it's actually the inverse. It's admiration with an exit strategy built in from the start, which means it was never quite admiration at all. Deflected gratitude. You hand someone a compliment or do them a small favor, and instead of them just saying thanks and letting it breathe, they immediately bat it away. Oh, it was nothing, they say. Or worse, they flip it back at you. You're the one who's always helping. You know the moment. It feels like they rejected the gift before you even finished handing it over, and that sting tells you something real about how they see you. When someone consistently deflects gratitude, they're often signaling discomfort with owing you anything. Or more subtly, they're protecting themselves from the implication that you matter enough to thank. Sometimes it's just politeness. We're all trained to minimize, but notice the pattern. Does this person deflect from everyone or just from you? If it's just from you, that's the data point. They may see you as someone who doesn't get to be owed, someone whose kindness is expected, not remarkable, someone whose presence doesn't require acknowledgement, because acknowledging it would mean admitting you have some weight in their life. There's also the version where they deflect by listing everything you've done instead. This one feels generous on the surface, but it's actually a small redirection, a way of saying, your help doesn't stand alone. It's just part of a transaction. They're protecting themselves from debt the only way they know how, which often means they're protecting themselves from closeness. Genuine gratitude requires vulnerability. It means standing still for a second and letting someone know they mattered enough to be felt. When someone consistently refuses that moment with you, they're not being humble. They're keeping you at arm's length, even if you're the one reaching in. The real tells comes when you watch how they receive thanks from people they actually feel safe with. The difference will be loud, and it will hurt a little less once you see it clearly. Volunteered vulnerability. There's a moment when someone tells you something they don't have to. A fear that wakes them at 3 in the morning. A mistake they're still ashamed of. A doubt they hide from everyone else. They're choosing you as the person who gets to hold that. When someone offers you their soft spots without being asked, they're essentially saying, I trust you won't weaponize this later. I believe you'll stay. Most people meter their honesty like a faucet, turning it on just enough so you know them, but never so much that they lose control. They share the curated version, the struggles that make them look self-aware, the vulnerabilities that come with a neat lesson attached. But real volunteered vulnerability has no safety net. It's messy. It's the admission that they don't know, that they're scared, that something broke, and they're not sure how to fix it. That kind of unfiltered exposure costs real courage. So when someone offers it to you, they're telling you something important. They've decided the risk of being fully seen by you is worth taking. They're also testing whether you'll honor it. Some people listen and then repeat it to others as dinner table entertainment. Some people listen and nod but never ask again, which feels like rejection. And some people listen like it matters. They remember details. They check in. They don't use the confession as a springboard to talk about themselves. The specific shape of their vulnerability tells you what they believe about you, what they think you can handle, what they they imagine you'll protect, what part of their life they want you to be close to. Pay attention to which confessions land easily and which ones seem to cost them everything. If someone volunteers their mess to you, they've already decided you're worth the risk. The real question is whether you'll treat that decision as the small miracle it actually is, or whether you'll let it slip into the ordinary. That's the clue that tells them everything about what you actually think of them. Secrets tested in small doses. You mention something personal. Not a huge thing, just a small vulnerability. Maybe you tell them about a mistake at work, or that you're worried about something, or that you did something embarrassing last week. Watch what happens next. Do they ask a follow-up question, or do they let it drop like you never said it? More tellingly, do they share something back, or do they keep the door one-way traffic only? Here's the thing that matters. People who genuinely care test the waters with vulnerability too. It's reciprocal. They meet you halfway because they're checking if you're safe to trust. The ones who don't, they're often just collecting information, or they're so wrapped up in their own stuff they can't make space for yours. But there's a sharper move to watch for: how they use that small secret later. If you tell them something soft, and 2 weeks later, they bring it up casually in conversation, almost like they're making sure you know they remember, that's genuine. They're saying, "This matters to me because you matter." Contrast that with people who either forget what you told them entirely, or worse, hold it hostage somehow, bringing it up only in moments of tension, or using it as social currency to impress someone else. The telling part isn't whether they ask you to share, it's whether they create the conditions where sharing feels safe. Do they interrupt? Do they check their phone? Do they make you feel like your words landed, or like you're just filling air? People worth keeping close don't just hear your secrets. They handle them like small sacred things. They ask follow-ups weeks later. They don't weaponize them. They give you something small back, some quiet piece of themselves in return. That exchange, humble and reverent as it is, tells you everything about whether you're being truly seen, or just being used as an audience to perform for. The depth of care lives in those tiny moments of remembrance. The gossip inclusion threshold. Think about the last time someone told you a secret about someone else. Not a big dramatic scandal, just something mildly sensitive, the kind of thing that could make someone look bad if it spread. Now ask yourself, why did they tell you? The answer lives in whether they trust you not to weaponize it. Gossip inclusion is a brutal tell because it has almost nothing to do with liking you in the abstract. It's about believing you are safe enough to be vulnerable around, that you won't use information as leverage, won't judge them for thinking out loud, won't mention it to the person who could hurt them most. When someone brings you into their circle of people who know things, they are making a calculated bet on your loyalty. It's permission giving, which only happens when genuine affection is present. The inverse cuts sharper. If someone never gossips around you, if they keep their observations about others locked up tight, they either don't feel comfortable with you, or they don't see you as part of the inner ring. Some people read that silence as respect. It usually is distance. Watch which friends get the unfiltered version of someone's thoughts about a mutual friend, and which ones get the sanitized public broadcast. The ones in the inner circle aren't betraying the person being discussed. They are being loyal to you. They are saying, "I know you well enough to think out loud. I trust you with the unpolished truth." Gossip gets written off as shallow, but it's actually one of the most honest gestures humans make to each other. Someone who lets their guard down around you, who shares the messy observations they'd never say in a group text, is someone who believes you are keeper-worthy. Someone who never lets their guard down around you may be protecting themselves, or protecting themselves from you. Pay attention to who gets the real version and who gets the edit. That gap is where the actual hierarchy of trust lives. Inside joke maintenance. You know that feeling when someone who cares about you brings up a joke from 2 years ago, something nobody else would remember, let alone bother to reference? That's a real signal living in the details. People who actively keep inside jokes alive are doing invisible emotional labor. They're saying, "I was paying attention when we laughed together. I've kept it safe in my head. You matter enough to me that I catalog the small, hilarious things between us." When someone drops your shared reference into a conversation with perfect timing, they're not just being funny, they're building continuity with you, stitching the past into the present. The inverse feels colder. If someone used to maintain inside jokes with you and then stops, something has shifted. Maybe they've grown distant, or maybe the relationship has moved into a different register. Pay attention to who still laughs when you say the half reference, the incomplete setup that only makes sense if you were there. Notice who finishes your jokes, who leans in when you're about to say the thing, who keeps the running gag alive even when it's not convenient. These are the people for whom the shorthand between you is worth preserving. It costs nothing but memory and intention. If someone consistently forgets your shared humor or acts like they don't know what you mean, they might be silently telling you something too, that they've mentally moved on or that they never quite felt it the way you did. Inside jokes can't be faked. You can't pretend to remember something you weren't there for, and you can't maintain a gag if the other person hasn't kept it alive too. Shared laughter preserved like this becomes its own small language, a code that only works between two people who've actually shown up for each other. So, the next time someone casually resurrects an old shared laugh, let it land. They're showing you exactly how much space you still occupy in their interior world, and that's never accidental. Topic recycling from last time. You're 3 texts in, and they bring up that same story they mentioned weeks ago, the one you already heard, same details, same punchline, same everything. It lands different when someone circles back to their own material like that, not because they forgot they told you, but because what it signals is how they're spending their brain space around you. If someone thinks you're genuinely interesting to them, they hunt for new things to share, new observations, little discoveries they can't wait to tell you specifically. Recycled topics suggest they're not building the conversation, they're filling dead air. It's the conversational equivalent of wearing the same outfit because you weren't thinking about what you'd see them in, a kind of autopilot that happens when someone isn't actively curating their world for your attention. Now, there's a softness here worth holding on to. Some people recycle because they're nervous, because they're searching for something you'll actually care about, or because anxiety makes them fall back on what's proven safe and reliable. But pay attention to the direction of the recycling instead. If they're rehashing old jokes to keep you laughing, mining the same well because they're trying to impress you, that's different from someone who's simply run out of new material and doesn't bother generating any. The harder read sits underneath. If they're thinking about you between conversations, they're thinking about what to talk about with you. They're collecting observations. They're noticing things and saving them. They're building a gallery of moments specifically meant for you. If you're hearing the same story twice in a season and nothing else fresh is landing, they probably aren't doing that work. They might like you fine. You might be pleasant company, easy enough to be around, but pleasant company doesn't inspire the effort of active attention. So the next time you hear a recycled topic, ask yourself, when was the last time they asked you something they didn't already know the answer to? That's where the real signal lives. The unprompted follow-up memory. You mention something small in passing. A job interview you're nervous about, a book you're reading, a restaurant you want to try. And weeks later, someone brings it up first, not because you reminded them, not because they needed something from you. They just remembered, they checked in on how it went, they asked if you ended up going. Here's what that actually means. You live in their mental space when you're not in the room. Your life is interesting enough that they've been thinking about it, running it through their head, wondering how your story turned out. That's not politeness, that's not obligation. People don't do that for everyone. We all have a finite number of people whose futures we actually track, whose small details we hold on to and care enough to follow up on. When someone does this unprompted, they've put you in that circle. The inverse is equally telling. The person who hears you mention something important and never asks again. Not because they forgot, because they didn't encode it in the first place. You didn't land on their radar as someone worth holding space for, and the really quiet version is the sneakiest. Someone follows up, but only when it serves them. They remember the detail because it's useful to them, not because they're rooting for you. Listen to the difference between, "Did you take that job?" and "So did you get that job? Because my cousin is looking for someone." The first one is about you. The second one is about your utility to them, and the math shifts entirely. The unprompted follow-up without any angle. That's one of the truest signals there is. It means you matter enough to them that your life deserves their active attention. It costs nothing but your actual mental real estate, which is precisely why it means everything. So the next time someone remembers something you forgot you even said, notice how that lands in your chest. Recall of your throwaway lines. You dropped something small into a conversation weeks ago, a half joke about your fear of flying, a passing comment about how you've never been good at cooking, a tiny admission buried in a longer story. You forget you said it. Then one day, someone brings it back. They mention it naturally, weave it into a new conversation, or ask you a follow-up question about it. That's not accident. That's attention. People who genuinely value you collect these fragments because they listen for the real stuff underneath what you're saying, not just the main plot. The throwaway line is actually where truth lives. You say the vulnerable things when you're not trying, when the guard is down. So when someone remembers and returns to that small detail, they're telling you something important. They were present. They cared enough to actually hear you, not just wait for their turn to talk. The flip side matters just as much. If you consistently mention something about yourself, a hobby, a struggle, a dream, and the person never circles back to it, never asks how it's going, never gives it a second thought, that absence is also data. It suggests they hear you as wallpaper, background noise to your own life. Not malice, usually. Just passivity. Just someone who is fundamentally elsewhere when you're speaking. The throwaway line test works because it measures something people can't easily fake. You can't force yourself to remember details you didn't actually attend to. You can't manufacture curiosity about the small corners of someone's life without real presence. Memory here isn't about effort. It's about where someone's attention naturally settles when you're not performing. So pay attention. Next time you're the listener, do you catch what someone actually cares about when they're not performing? And notice who catches what you care about, who circles back without being reminded. That's where the real relationship is, in those tiny recalled moments that prove someone was actually there, that they heard you when it mattered most. Selective memory for your losses. Pay attention to what surfaces in casual conversation when you're not steering it there. You mention a job that evaporated, a relationship that ended, a dream you had to shelve. Months roll past. You've rebuilt. You're moving differently now. Then one day, mid-conversation, they're casually lobbing that old loss back at you like it's your defining feature, crystalline and untouched, while somehow the 3 recoveries you've made since then just dissolve from their memory. It's rarely accident. When someone genuinely holds you, they keep your wins alongside your wounds with equal weight. They remember your comeback with the same voltage they remember your fall. But when someone has invested in keeping you smaller, or when they're locked in some invisible competition with you, they curate. They become the archivist of every stumble you've ever shared while your victories slip through their fingers like water. Watch for how they resurrect that old wound. It usually surfaces exactly when it serves them, to make a point stick, to soften you before they ask for something, to remind you of what you're capable of failing at. The person who loves you doesn't unconsciously do this. They're not always malicious, but they are intentional. They're building a case out of your losses, brick by brick, and that case holds more weight in their mind than any evidence of your growth. The real signal comes in moments when you've genuinely moved past something and they insist on keeping it alive anyway, or when you share something good and you actually watch them visibly labor, to find enthusiasm. That gap between how they see you and how they need you to stay is the whole conversation written in invisible ink. Notice who celebrates your recovery as loudly as they witnessed your pain, who asks follow-up questions about what you learned, who lets old chapters close without trying to dog-ear them. Those are the people holding your actual story. Everyone else is working from an edited version, and the edits always reveal what they need from you, far more than what they believe about you. Reference to your absent self. There's a moment that happens in groups when you step away to get water or take a call, and when you come back, someone mentions something you said or did while you were gone. And the way they reference you tells you almost everything. The tone, the detail level, whether they got it right or spun it sideways, how they defend or dismiss your absent self, whether they correct false impressions or let them calcify into group jokes. It's all a map of how much real estate you occupy in their mind. If someone says, "Oh, we were just talking about that thing you always do," they've been thinking about you as a character, a pattern, a presence worth noting. But if they say, "Someone made a joke about that situation you complained about," they're just slot filling. You were a placeholder for whatever conversation needed momentum. The real tell comes down to loyalty in your absence. A friend who corrects the record when someone misquotes you is someone who actually sees you. A friend who laughs along at a distortion of what you said and never straightens it out. They're comfortable with you being wrong, or at least don't care enough to spend the small social currency it takes to fix it. Listen to how they finish too. Do they say, "And you know how your name is?" with warmth or exasperation? Are you explained like someone worth understanding, or dismissed like a joke everyone's tired of? People who respect you make you sound interesting when you're not there. They give you the benefit of the doubt, correct false impressions, maybe even resurrect something clever you said weeks ago, and give you the credit. People who are indifferent or distant reference you mostly as evidence for why you're predictable, difficult, or why they disagree with you. The ones who truly value you protect your story even when you can't. Your absent self is a mirror, and how someone talks about you when you're gone is almost always more honest than what they say to your face. Third-party name-dropping about you. When someone brings you up to other people without you in the room, and then you find out about it, not from them but from a mutual friend's casual mention. That moment is almost always telling. If they're name-dropping you in a way that makes you look competent, funny, or trustworthy, they're essentially vouching for you, putting their own social capital behind your name. That's not something people do lightly or for people they tolerate. They're building a version of you in other people's minds, which means they've already built one in their own mind first, and it's a good one. But sometimes people mention you to others as a punchline, or as an example of something gone wrong, or as a footnote to their own story. And that matters too. The person who brings up how you messed up to their friend group is distance-keeping, positioning themselves as separate from your failure, subtly inoculating themselves against association with you. Then there's the person who barely mentions you at all to others, not out of malice, but because you don't exist in their external narrative. You're compartmentalized. You matter in the moment you're together, but you don't bleed into the rest of their life. The real signal lives in the quality of the mention, not just whether it happens. Does your name come up when it's natural, or do they seem to manufacture reasons to say it? Are they defending you when you're not there, or just name-checking you as though you're a reference they have to cite? Are they proud to know you, or managing how others see them through you? Pay attention less to whether they mention you and more to whether they defend you in that mention, because that's where loyalty actually lives, not in the talking about you, but in how they talk about you when it costs them something to do it. The next time you hear secondhand that someone spoke your name, ask yourself whether they were building you up or building distance. The favor asymmetry ledger. You help them move. You pick them up at the airport. You cancel plans when they need to vent. Then one day, you mention you're stressed about a work thing, and they say, "Oh man, that's rough," and pivot to their own story without asking a single follow-up question. Notice what happens next, and notice whether you even feel safe asking for the thing you actually need. People who think you're disposable keep invisible scorecards, but not the way you'd expect. They're not carefully tallying favors so they can pay you back. They're keeping score so they never have to. Every time you help them, it's proof that you're the helper. Every time you need help, it becomes your problem to solve quietly, alone, without burdening them. The asymmetry isn't accidental. It's chosen over and over. You offer, they accept, you offer again, and somewhere in that pattern, the assumption hardens. You're the one built for giving. They're the one built for receiving. The trap is that you might start believing it too. Apologizing for having needs, hedging your asks with jokes, or just stopping the asking altogether because it feels safer than risking the no. But real people who value you will notice the tilt and correct it without being asked. They'll catch themselves mid-accept and ask what you need. They'll offer before you have to. They'll remember. They'll follow up on it days later, checking whether things got better. Not perfectly, not always. Nobody's flawless, but the direction will be toward balance, not away from it. And that direction matters more than the speed. The ledger moment arrives when you finally ask for something small and see how they respond. Do they scramble to help, or do they suddenly become very busy, very unavailable, very forgetful about how much you've shown up for them? That answer is the conversation clue you've been waiting for. It tells you whether the asymmetry was circumstance or character, and that difference changes everything about what comes next. Willingness to owe you. You lend someone money, cover their shift, or write a recommendation letter when you're already drowning in work, and then you watch what happens next. Do they let the debt sit light between you, or do they scramble to settle it? More than that, do they bring it up later with unprompted gratitude, or does it vanish from conversation like it never occurred? Here's the thing. People who genuinely like you are almost uncomfortable with obligation. They hate owing you because they hate the asymmetry it creates. They want the ledger balanced, not because they're coldly calculating, but because indebtedness puts a tiny wedge between people, and they don't want that wedge with you. So, they pay you back quickly, offer to do something bigger in return, bring it up naturally in conversation like it still weighs on them. They're restless about it. The way they mention it casual but weighted, tells you they're sitting with gratitude, not ignoring it. Conversely, people who don't think much of you will happily let the favor sit there collecting dust, not because they're cruel, but because you haven't registered as someone whose account they feel compelled to keep square. The debt doesn't itch. You're not someone they're trying to maintain standing with. They might even hint that you owed them something first. Make light jokes about how you're always lending and never needing. Twist the whole thing into a pattern that erases their side entirely. The deepest tell is this: if someone asks for help and preemptively says, "I'll get you back," or "What do I owe you?" they're already tracking the exchange mentally. They see this as a transaction with someone worth maintaining balance with. But if someone asks casually, forgets about it entirely later, or acts mildly annoyed when you mention it, you already know exactly where you live in their world. Pay attention to the speed of repayment and the quality of acknowledgement, not the words, but the weight behind them. Debt between people who matter feels genuinely heavy. Debt between people who don't barely registers at all. The preemptive excuse. Watch what happens the moment someone cancels plans with you. Before disappointment even lands, they're already explaining. Sometimes spilling details you didn't ask for. Sometimes in a tone that feels like they've practiced it. They're not leaving space for your reaction, they're flooding it first. That gap between the cancellation and the rush to fill it is where the real message lives. When people genuinely feel secure with you, they'll often just say they can't make it and let that sit. No defensive buildup, no rehearsed apology. But when someone preemptively shores up their credibility before you've asked a single question, they're telegraphing something specific. They expect judgment from you, the way you might brace before telling a parent you failed a test. Maybe they've let you down before and are trying to prevent that old friction from surfacing again. Maybe they're not sure you'll understand, so they're building a case ahead of time. Or maybe, and this one stings, they're quietly revealing that they don't think you'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Notice if these preemptive explanations come wrapped in self-criticism too. "I know I'm the worst," or "I'm such a flake." That's different from just stating facts. That's someone trying to get ahead of your judgment by doing it first and harder, like they're confessing before trial. The person who trusts your goodwill usually doesn't perform penance before you've asked for it. Sometimes this pattern shows up because someone's been burned by you before. Maybe rightfully, but more often, it reveals something quieter, that you're someone who needs convincing, someone who needs the story to land perfectly before they feel safe with you. It doesn't always mean they dislike you. It means they're unsure of your mercy. The next time you notice it happening, try just saying, "I believe you," and watch what happens. Often, you'll see a real exhale, a visible softening, the kind that tells you exactly how much tension they'd been carrying. That exhale is the whole conversation right there. Preemptive time boundary. You're mid-conversation with someone and they say, "I've got about 10 minutes before I need to head out." And then they settle in like they mean it. Or they say it and their leg starts bouncing. That opening move, before you've even asked for their time, tells you something sharp about how they're valuing the moment with you. If someone genuinely wants to be present, they usually don't announce the exit before the entrance. They show up, and then circumstances demand they leave. But when they lead with a time limit unprompted, they're often pre-protecting themselves, carving out psychological permission to leave early, softening the guilt before it lands, or signaling that this isn't where their energy is flowing. It's not always conscious, and it's not always unkind. Sometimes it's just practicality. But watch what happens next. Do they actually stay for those 10 minutes? Fully in it? Or does the clock they just mentioned start working on them, shrinking their focus the moment they name it? The difference matters. People who genuinely like you and can't stay long usually apologize after. They get caught up, lose track, then suddenly realize the time. The preemptive boundary is different. It's like they're building an escape hatch before the trap door even closes. You'll also notice it in texts. "I can only respond quickly," before you've asked anything, or "Not sure how available I'll be," before plans are even set. It's the brain's way of protecting against disappointment, theirs or yours. Sometimes that's healthy self-awareness. Sometimes it's someone keeping one foot out the door before they've even stepped in. The quiet signal here isn't rudeness, it's distance. And distance, announced early, often grows wider over time. The thing is, you don't need to judge it, just notice it. People show you their investment level in real time if you listen for when they're already thinking about leaving before the conversation has truly begun. The exit rehearsal. You're 3 minutes into a story and something shifts in the room. Their weight redistributes, a phone glance happens, or their mind visibly starts drafting the goodbye they haven't said yet. The exit rehearsal is that strange phantom performance, the way someone stages their departure while still physically present, turning their body into a countdown clock. Watch for it carefully, the hand hovering over the mouse during a video call, eyes cutting to the timestamp, like it owes them money, shoulders collapsing into that particular slouch that means, I'm bracing for release. In person, it's sharper. They'll stand when you sit, keep their bag on their lap like a getaway vehicle, announce, I should probably get going soon, 3 minutes after you started talking, not because you bored them, but because they've already left emotionally, and now they're just performing the lag time. Here's what cuts through the noise. People who genuinely value you don't rehearse the exit while the scene is still playing. They might eventually need to leave. Life happens, schedules collide, but they don't act out their departure in real time, creating this eerie half-presence. At the nervous system level, the exit rehearsal broadcasts, I'm waiting for permission to abandon this, or more simply, I'm already somewhere else, and you're just a delay. You've done it too, sat through a call with someone while mentally drafting your closing line, one foot already out the door, but the person who genuinely thinks well of you doesn't do that math. They sit all the way in. When they leave, but while they're there, they're actually there, not running the clock, not rehearsing the goodbye, not performing absence while taking up space. The real tell isn't whether someone leaves, it's whether they're present while deciding to. Watch for who gives you their full moment and who's already counting down to freedom. That small difference, the one between sitting all the way through and rehearsing the exit, reveals everything about how much room you actually occupy in their mind. Body angle toward the door. Watch someone's feet and shoulders the next time you're halfway through a story, not where their head tilts, but where their actual center mass points. If their body angles toward the exit, even by inches, some electrical part of their brain is already calculating the escape route, and it's happening completely below their conscious radar. This is the kind of tell nobody can fake, because nobody's even trying. Their body just knows what their mouth hasn't admitted yet. You could be making them laugh, telling them something that matters, building real momentum in the conversation, but if their torso leans doorward, they're voting with their spine. The strangest part is how you feel it before you see it. That vague sense that someone is already halfway gone, even though they're nodding and holding eye contact and saying all the right things. Odds are 90% of that feeling isn't coming from their words at all. It's coming from the angle of their shoulders. A person who's genuinely engaged, or at least genuinely choosing to stay in the conversation, naturally orients their center mass toward you. It's an unconscious anchor. No exit plan, no half attention, no feet already moving. Now context absolutely matters here. Someone might angle toward the door because they legitimately need to leave soon, or because their back is killing them, or because the room feels crowded and they need breathing space. But if you notice it happening consistently, in moments when they swear they want to be there, when it's just you two and they're supposedly invested, when there's zero external pressure, that's real information, not a sentence, not a proof, but data worth collecting. Their body position is much harder to lie with than their smile or their words. Shoulders, stance, the honest angle of their core. These leak what their mouth is still protecting. Start noticing where people actually point themselves, not just where they look. You'll learn who wants to stay and who is already mentally walking out. Selective disclosure of plans. Your coworker mentions they're hiking next weekend. Casual, eyes on their phone, no seat saved for you at that table. That tiny drop in your chest knows what it means before your brain catches up. Selective disclosure isn't about what people tell you. It's about the gap between what they do with you and what they do while forgetting to mention you exist. Someone who genuinely wants you in their orbit shares unfiltered plans early. The concert they're considering, the dinner they're sketching out, the vacation half-formed. They loop you in before it's locked down. They ask what you think. But when someone only mentions plans after they're already booked, or mentions them sideways to someone else while you're standing there, or conveniently skips over something you would have wanted to join, that's language too. It's the language of peripheral. Watch also for the inverse pattern. If someone tells you their daily frustrations, small upcoming events, and half-formed ideas before telling anyone else, you're in their inner circle. They're thinking of you first. The tell isn't a single forgotten invite. That's just being human. The tell is the pattern. Learning someone's life through side comments, through mutual friends, or after the fact, day after day, month after month. That's not accident. That's architecture. You're being held at a distance that feels close enough not to call out, far enough to keep you from asking why you weren't invited. What makes this sharp is how deniable it stays. They forgot. They assumed you'd be busy. They didn't think you'd care. But people don't forget the people they prioritize. Next time someone mentions a plan, notice whether you already knew the answer before they opened their mouth. The retroactive invitation. Think back to the last time you found out someone had done something fun without mentioning it until later. You heard through the grapevine they went to that concert or that restaurant, and then days passed before a text arrived. Hey, we should grab dinner soon. The gap between the event and the mention of you is everything. When someone genuinely wants you in their life, they either invite you in real time or at least reference what already happened. That place was incredible. You'd love it next time you're coming, in a way that feels like they actually wish you'd been there. A vague future promise that only emerges because they ran into you or felt a flicker of guilt carries a completely different weight. The retroactive invitation is what people offer when they want to seem like they value you without having actually chosen you. It's social insurance, a preemptive cover for tracks they know they're leaving. You feel it in your chest. They include you after the fact so they can say they tried, but the timing reveals you weren't on their mind when it mattered. What stings is how it mirrors real friendliness from the outside, but the person inside always knows the difference. They felt the absence in real time and only got mentioned because someone called them out or guilt finally caught up. Some people live in this pattern, constantly inviting you to the next thing, the future thing, the theoretical gathering that probably won't materialize anyway. The pattern whispers they're fine with you as a backup, someone whose company is tolerable in hindsight, but not someone they actually prioritize or plan around. Here's the sharper part. They often genuinely don't realize they're doing it, which tells you something crucial about how present you actually are in their thinking. The real tell isn't whether they invite you at all, it's whether they're thinking of you while the moment is still happening, not after it's already gone. That timing difference is where people tell the truth without meaning to. The reluctant plural invitation. When someone tells you, we should all grab coffee sometime, or you should come to the thing we're doing, pay attention to that grammatical slip, the shift from me and you to us and them. A person who genuinely wants to see you will find a way to say it singularly. I'd love to get coffee with you, or I really want you there. Not always, but often enough that the absence matters. The plural invitation is how someone says yes without committing, and the language reveals the real temperature underneath. It scatters the intimacy across a group, which makes backing out easier for both of you, and it turns you from the point of the plan into a welcome passenger on someone else's larger project. You're not singled out, you're added to a demographic. The person who actively wants you present will mention a specific time, ask your preference first, or slip in a personal detail. I know you love that place, or I thought of you when I saw this. A reluctant plural invitation lands differently. It feels like an afterthought, an amendment to a scheme already in motion. You're included, technically wanted, but not urgently, not specifically, not in a way that shifts their planning around you. It's the social equivalent of being told you're welcome to join, but nothing changes if you don't show up. The sting is that it's not rejection. You can't fully grieve what wasn't a clear no. But it's not real priority either. It's the middle ground where people live when they're being nice rather than being real. When you spot this pattern, the instinct is to prove them wrong by showing up anyway, by being so charming they regret not asking you first. Don't do that. If you accept, go lightly. Don't anchor your evening to it. And the next time you're extending an invitation, check yourself. Are you saying, I want you there? Or are you saying, you're welcome in a group I'm assembling? The distinction is small in the moment. In relationships, it's everything. Plans in the abstract tense. Pay close attention the next time someone talks about a future with you, because the grammar they choose will tell you almost everything. Your friend says, we should grab dinner sometime, versus let's lock in Tuesday at 7. And those aren't interchangeable. When someone switches into the abstract tense around you, using conditional language like one could, vague timelines like someday, or hypothetical framings like that would be fun, they're not being dishonest so much as they're keeping themselves unburdened. They're already protecting the escape route before anything's been promised. The abstract tense is how humans talk about things that might happen to other people, not things happening with people we've truly chosen. Listen for it, they say, if we ever get around to it, instead of, I'm going to make this happen, or people typically enjoy that, instead of, I want to do that with you. Watch whether their language flips into concrete details, specific restaurants, actual dates, their calendar becoming real. When they talk about people they genuinely want to see, someone who's made room for you in their actual life will shift into specificity almost without effort. Their brain's already moving forward, and the words follow naturally. But when someone only ever uses abstract future language with you, when months go by and "we should" never crystallizes into a locked plan, when "someday" never gets a calendar slot, you're sitting in their conditional column. It's not always cruelty. Sometimes you simply haven't migrated from the thought about it, but haven't committed pile into their real life yet. The real clue isn't a single sentence or one vague offer. It's the stubborn pattern. One abstract plan might be circumstance or timing. 3 months of "we should" with 0 concrete dinners locked in. That's your signal. Notice which people make the language switch with you and which ones keep you floating in hypotheticals. The distance between abstract and concrete is the distance between thinking about someone and actually choosing them. The scheduling vagueness signal. You float the idea of getting together, and the response comes back almost immediately. "Yeah, totally, sounds great." But then the second sentence contains the real message. "Let's figure it out sometime soon." Sometime soon. 2 of the softest, most non-committal words in the English language, and they land on you like a door that closes without locking. If someone genuinely wants to see you, the conversation shifts fast into specifics. They pull out their calendar. They say, "Next Tuesday works." They double-check your number. The friction dissolves. But when the enthusiasm stays stuck in the cloud, "We should hang. Let's do something. I'll text you." Something has already been decided before either of you hangs up. What's being decided is not whether they like you. Exactly. It's that you don't rank high enough for the small, finite resource of their planning energy. Scheduling is friction, and real prioritization means someone volunteers to absorb that friction for you. They remember the conversation. They send the calendar invite. They don't leave it floating in the maybe zone where good intentions go to fade. The cruel part is how normal this feels now. Casual friendships and distant relatives live entirely in vagueness, and we've all learned to interpret it as warmth. "Let's stay in touch" means you won't. Soon means never. But here's what actually matters. If you're tracking whether someone wants you around, stop listening to what they say they'll do and start noticing what they're willing to coordinate. People make time for people who matter. They sacrifice other things, rearrange their schedules, send follow-up texts without prompting. Everything else gets the "we'll figure it out" treatment, which is just a slower way of saying no without the guilt of saying it directly. The signal is not in the words. It's in how hard they're willing to work to nail down an actual date. That effort, or the absence of it, is the conversation nobody's having out loud. Cancellation reasoning detail. Someone cancels plans with you, and you get a text. And here's where most people miss the whole thing. The instinct is to focus on the cancellation itself, but the real signal lives in how much they actually tell you. If someone genuinely values your time and connection, they tend to volunteer the real story, even when it's messy or inconvenient. They might say, "My mom just got bad news and I need to be there," or "I overcommitted and I'm drowning. I'm sorry." The detail matters because it says, "You deserve to know what's actually happening. I'm not going to make you guess or fill in blanks." But someone who sees you as low priority, they hand you the minimum. "Something came up," or "I can't make it." No explanation, no elaboration, maybe a sorry emoji if you're lucky. That vagueness is not accidental laziness. It's a signal that they don't feel accountable to you because in their hierarchy, you don't rank high enough to warrant honesty. The real tell is when you've built a pattern. Does this person give you real reasons sometimes and then ghost you with nothing other times? That's someone recalibrating based on mood or circumstance, treating you like a low-stakes option you can shuffle around. But if someone consistently gives you the full picture, even when it's awkward, even when they're embarrassed, they're basically saying, "I respect you enough to be straight." Chronic vagueness, on the other hand, is someone telling you they don't feel that responsibility to you at all. Watch for the shift, too. People sometimes start detailed and drift into brush-offs as time passes, and that drift itself is information about how the relationship is changing in their mind. So next time someone cancels, stop looking just at the fact and look at the words instead. Are you getting a reason or a brush-off? Are they treating your time like it matters enough to explain, or like you're someone they can rearrange without consequence? The level of detail they volunteer is them showing you exactly where you sit in their life. Reschedule initiation ownership. You've both agreed to grab coffee next Friday, but something shifts, work gets messy, or life just happens. Who reaches out first to say, hey, that Friday isn't going to work? Pay close attention to that move because it tells you something clean about where you sit in someone's mental queue. When people genuinely value you, they tend to own the rescheduling friction without hesitation. They don't leave you hanging in uncertainty. They don't make you the one who has to voice the problem or hunt for a new slot. Instead, they take the initiative to say, I can't make it, but here are 3 times that work instead. Or, let's push this. I want to give you real time. It's a small thing, but it costs them something. The discomfort of being the bearer of bad news, the effort of finding alternatives, the risk that you might feel deprioritized. And they do it anyway, because letting you twist in the wind would feel worse to them than the temporary awkwardness of the reschedule itself. The flip side is harder to sit with. When someone waits for you to notice the problem, or when they reschedule only after you've already suggested it, or when they show up late without warning and leave the apology vague, that's a different signal. It's not always malice. Sometimes it's just that the relationship sits lower in their stack and they don't feel the same pull to protect your experience of it. The texture of who owns the friction matters because it reveals whether someone sees the connection as something worth the small cost of their own inconvenience. It's the difference between someone who feels responsible for you and someone who feels responsible to you. Next time you have to bail on plans, notice which version of yourself you become, the person who takes the hit or the person who lets someone else figure it out. That choice, made quietly and without fanfare, is the answer you're actually giving. Reply length symmetry. You send them a paragraph, they send back a sentence. You craft something thoughtful over coffee. They respond while walking to their car. The mismatch sits there, quiet and easy to rationalize. Maybe they're busy, maybe texting isn't their style, but underneath that mismatch is something harder to ignore. Reply length symmetry is how people show you what mental real estate you occupy in their life. When someone matches your effort, length for length, thoughtfulness for thoughtfulness, they're signaling that you're worth the same investment of time and cognitive load that you're giving them. It's not about perfection or always being equally verbose. It's about the pattern over time. Someone who consistently replies to your detailed messages with one-word answers while writing novels to someone else. That's not busyness or a personality quirk. That's priority sorting, and you're not at the top of the list. Conversely, watch for people who actually elevate your energy in conversations, who take your brief check-in and expand it into something richer because they want more from you, because sitting with you matters. Those people are rare, and they're showing you something too, that your thoughts are worth their time and attention. The tricky part is reading the context correctly. A text at 2 a.m. might get short replies from anyone. A person running a crisis gets a pass. But zoom out over weeks and months, and patterns emerge like a photograph developing in water. Does this person generally match the effort you extend, or do they consistently lag behind? Do they mirror your enthusiasm, or do they dial it down and keep you at arm's length? Do they ever surprise you by going deeper into what you've shared? The quiet signal is this: people reveal their sense of your value through the shape of their replies, not just the words inside them. Pay close attention to whether someone thinks you're worth a full conversation or just another notification in their day. The read then wait pattern. Watch what happens after you send a message to someone you care about. They read it. You see that little notification tick or eye icon pop up, and then silence. Minutes stretch. Hours maybe. No response, even though they clearly saw it. Most people assume this means they're busy or forgot, but there's a sharper thing happening underneath. When someone reads your message and doesn't respond right away, they're making a choice about how much energy you deserve in that moment. It's not laziness, it's allocation. They're telling you, without words, where you rank in their active attention. Compare this to how they text someone else. Maybe they read that message and fire back in seconds. Thumbs moving fast, energy high. The difference between those two timings is the difference between someone you matter to and someone who matters when it's convenient. Now, the tricky part: context matters. Genuine emergencies happen. People have bad days, but the pattern is what you're listening for. If someone consistently reads your messages and waits hours or days before responding while doing the same to others, that's neutral. They're just a slow responder. But if they read yours and wait, then you catch them posting stories or liking comments in real time. That's telling. They saw you and chose to engage with something else first. It doesn't mean they dislike you. It means you're not creating urgency in their mind. The person who truly values your presence reads and responds close together, or they don't read at all. They're honest about being unavailable. The read then wait is the middle ground where people keep you warm, but not hot, available, but not prioritized. Pay attention to whether that gap is expanding or staying the same, whether it tightens on certain days or certain topics, whether they speed up after you pull back. That trajectory tells you everything you need to know about where things are actually heading. And sometimes the kindest move is to stop waiting for them to choose you and start choosing yourself instead. Emoji register in messages. Text someone you're close to and watch what comes back. A period at the end of a sentence, a thumbs up, radio silence on the emoji question entirely. Each one is a tiny temperature reading, and most of us miss it completely. If someone usually peppers their messages with laughing faces and sudden warmth, and one day the emoji just stops, something has shifted. Maybe they're busy, sure, but they're also signaling a change in emotional engagement without saying a word. The absence of what was there before is louder than you think. Flip it the other way, and you'll notice something equally telling. If someone you barely know starts throwing heart emojis and smiley faces at you early on, they might be compensating. That sudden burst of digital warmth sometimes feels like overcompensation, like they're performing closeness they don't quite feel yet, or using emojis as a buffer against the anxiety of awkwardness. But here's what actually matters. The consistency tells you more than any single choice ever could. Someone who texts you with genuine affection develops their own emoji fingerprint, and it stays steady. It won't suddenly vanish when things get real, and it won't explode into overdrive when they're nervous. The register, that emotional baseline, is what you're reading. Think of it like a voice. You know when a friend sounds different on the phone, even before they say anything's wrong. Emojis work the same way in text. When someone cares about you, their emoji use isn't random or performative. It's consistent with who they are as a person. When someone's pulling back or losing interest, the emoji register flattens first. Messages get shorter, warmth gets colder, the little humanizing touches dry up like a well running empty. Pay attention the next time someone's communication shifts. Not because it's proof of anything final or absolute, but because it's usually a sign they're trying to tell you something before they found the actual words to say it. Your job is just to notice the shift and sit with what it might mean. Voice note, willingness. Notice the exact moment someone shifts from typing to actually, let me just send you a voice note instead. That little surrender tells you something real about how safe they feel with you. A voice note is riskier than text because your tone, your hesitations, the laugh that escapes, or the sigh mid-sentence, it all stays there, permanent and unedited. When someone chooses that medium with you, they're making a bet that you'll sit with their mess, that you won't weaponize the rawness, that you'll hear them unguarded. The hesitancy kicks in the other direction too. Someone who always defaults to text, even when voice would be faster, is often protecting the distance, the ability to rewrite their reaction, to curate what reaches you. But watch the people who send voice notes without rehearsal, who let you hear them rambling or laughing at their own jokes, who assume you'll just take it as is. That's trust. They're not keeping score. Now flip it. If you send someone a voice note and they write back in careful typed paragraphs, they've just shown you their comfort zone. They're keeping the conversation defended, everything drafted and defensible. This isn't always a warning. Some brains are wired for text, but if someone sends voice notes constantly while responding to yours with paragraphs, they're comfortable being heard, but maybe not ready to listen the same way. They want the stage. They're less eager for the intimate back and forth. The relationships where people genuinely feel known, the ones that last, almost always have voice notes flowing both directions by month 3 or 4. It's shorthand for, I'm unfiltered with you because you're unfiltered with me. Next time you're in a text chain, catch who breaks into voice first. That's who stopped keeping score. Group chat address avoidance. You're sitting in a group chat, maybe with your college friends, your work team, or your extended friend circle, and someone brings up a plan that directly involves you. Maybe it's about a trip you're organizing, feedback on something you shared, or a conflict that needs addressing. And then it happens. The person you're watching for goes quiet, not the normal quiet of someone checking their phone, the studied quiet of someone who saw it and decided not to engage. Hours pass, messages pile up. They'll text you a heart react to something else in the chat. They'll laugh at a joke, they'll share a meme, they'll even get playfully loose in a tangent. But when your name lands in the conversation, or your thing needs an answer, nothing. The silence is not accidental. This is what's called group chat address avoidance, and it tells you something sharper than any rejection could. When someone is genuinely busy or overwhelmed, they'll usually duck out of the whole chat, disappear for a day, come back quieter. But selective silence, jumping back in after your moment passes, reveals that they're avoiding you specifically, not conversation itself. They're protecting themselves from the emotional weight of engaging with you. Whether that's because they're uncomfortable with conflict, they've checked out of the relationship, or they're afraid of what they might feel if they have to give you a real answer. The tricky part is that this move looks like respect for their own boundaries. And sometimes it genuinely is, but more often it's a slow signal that they're not willing to invest the vulnerability that real friendship or partnership requires. They'll stay in your orbit, they'll stay warm when it's easy, but they won't meet you in the tough spots. So next time you notice someone vanishing precisely when you appear in the thread, believe that they're showing you exactly how present they want to be in your life, and it's worth knowing before you spend energy hoping they'll show up differently. The public versus private tone gap. You ever notice how someone lights up when they introduce you to a group, all warm and laughing? Then the moment you're alone, their voice flattens, like someone turned down the dial. That shift is information, not the kind you get from what they're saying, but from how much energy they're spending on the performance. When someone genuinely values you, their baseline doesn't swing that wildly between audiences. They might be more animated with your shared friends. That's natural, but there's a thread of consistency, a core temperature that doesn't crater when the spotlight moves. The gap widens when someone is managing your image or their image of you for other people. Maybe you're the funny coworker in public, but they barely crack a smile when nobody's watching, or they're effusive about your achievements when their boss is listening but go quiet when it's just the two of you. It's the difference between someone proud to know you and someone using you as a prop. The tricky part is that people aren't always lying in either mode. They're just revealing what you matter for. In public, you might be entertainment, status, or proof of something. In private, you might simply be less useful, less urgent, or less interesting to their real life. The tone gap is where the hierarchy lives. Notice what happens after a group dinner or a work event. Does the warmth stick, or does it evaporate the second the door closes? Does their interest in what you're saying stay steady, or do they suddenly have somewhere else their head needs to be? Someone who thinks well of you doesn't need to perform that thought. They just carry it into the quiet moments too, the way you remember someone's birthday without having to psych yourself up to care. Pay attention to the texture of that private mode. Is it calm and easy, or relieved and distant? If you're always the opening act and never the main event, that's worth hearing, and it's worth believing what it tells you about where you actually sit. The unsolicited photo share. A text lands with a photo. Not a meme, not a screenshot, just an image of something they saw that made them think of you. Zero explanation attached. Pay attention to that moment because it reveals something people almost never fake. When someone sends you things unprompted, they have handed you access to the raw feed of their day. They are not performing, not building a case, not trying to land an impression. They saw something, and your name fired across their synapses before they could stop it. That neural reflex is the unsolicited photo share, and it is one of the quietest declarations of where you actually live in someone's mind. This is the closeness that does not need volume, not the person who writes you paragraphs or calls constantly, but the one who thinks of you in the margins, in the Tuesday afternoon lull, in the split second between seeing and moving on. People do this with family members, with partners, with the 3 or 4 people they genuinely want to keep. They do not do it with people they are managing, people they resent, or people they have already half decided to let go. It requires a small but real act of cognitive attention. Their brain has to surface you before habit and distraction pull them under. Watch the inverse too. If someone never sends you a random photo, never tags you, never shares a link with no preamble, that silence has weight. They are not thinking about you between conversations. You exist only in the moments they have made space for you, not in the unguarded seconds when the edit function is off. The unsolicited share is the opposite of that architecture. It is proof that you linger. So if you want actual data on where you stand, stop waiting for the rehearsed declarations and start tracking the small, unrehearsed drops. A photo at 2 p.m. on a random Tuesday contains more truth than a birthday message that took 20 minutes to craft. Congratulations latency after wins. You just got the job, you crush the presentation, you close the deal. The moment you tell someone close to you, their response lands. But how fast does the warmth actually arrive? Someone who genuinely roots for you gets excited before their brain even catches up. They're already smiling, already reaching for their phone to tell others. But watch for the pause. A half beat too long before, "Oh, that's great," is not nothing. That delay is your brain telling you something worth hearing. It might mean envy is firing up faster than their joy, or maybe they're running a quick mental calculation about how your win affects them. Or, somewhere deeper they're wondering if your elevation changes the shape of the friendship. The words might all be right. Congratulatory, warm, encouraging, but timing doesn't lie the way words do. Someone truly invested in you hits you with immediate enthusiasm, the kind that floods before they've had a chance to filter it. The slower versions often come wrapped in follow-up questions designed to bring the focus back down to earth or sideways toward them. "Oh wow, how much are they paying?" Or, "I wonder if this means you'll be too busy for us." These aren't malicious additions. They're just what happens when someone is processing your win through a lens of loss, or worry, or comparison. The real tell is what happens in the first 3 seconds, not the speech they've rehearsed by second 5. If you have to mentally give them a chance to catch up, to let the news settle before they feel happy for you, you're watching someone choosing generosity rather than feeling it. And that matters, not because it means they don't care, but because it means their care comes with conditions, or friction, or enough of their own stuff that your good news has to get in line. The people who want you to win don't need to think about it first. Sympathy speed after losses. You tell someone you lost your job, got dumped, or failed at something that mattered. Watch what happens in the next few seconds. Do they lean in? Do they ask a follow-up? Or do they pivot to their own story? The speed at which someone's face softens, or doesn't, tells you something real about how they hold space for your pain. Some people have what you might call sympathy velocity. The moment they sense you're hurt, they're already there, already asking what you need, already remembering details from last time you were struggling. Others have a delay, not because they are cruel, but because your loss doesn't trigger their urgency. They offer comfort eventually, sure, but it lands like a courtesy rather than a reflex. They may even get there, but you feel the lag between your words and their response. The tricky part is that sympathy speed rarely correlates with how much someone likes you. It correlates more with how quickly their own nervous system recognizes distress in others. Some people are simply wired to pick up on pain, the way dogs hear high frequencies. But here's what matters. People who care about you typically remove that lag over time. They learn your patterns. They know what loss means to you specifically. They remember. So if months or years in, someone still takes 3 beats to register your hurt or responds with generic comfort before moving on, that's information worth sitting with. It doesn't mean they dislike you. It means you might not be in their active emotional orbit. The people closest to you will develop what you could call sympathy muscle memory. They won't have to think about responding. They just will. Their body will move toward you before their brain catches up. That reflex, that absence of delay, is one of the quietest ways someone shows you how real you are to them. Watch for who makes sympathy feel like second nature, not an obligation. That automatic reach is worth more than 1,000 kind words. The Schadenfreude micro-smile. You're telling someone about a mistake you made, a loss, a small humiliation, and for about 1/3 of a second, their mouth twitches up at the corner. Then it's gone. Their face returns to sympathy or neutrality, and they say the right thing. But you caught it. That flicker was real. Schadenfreude, the quiet pleasure in another person's suffering, is almost impossible to fake away completely. And the micro-smile is its confession. It leaks through because it's fast, because our conscious mind hasn't had time to apply the social mask. Most people don't want to admit they felt a pinch of satisfaction when someone else tripped. It signals something darker than simple empathy. A ranking, a comparison, a small proof that at least in this moment, they're doing better than you. What makes it especially telling is context. If someone smiles that way when you share bad news, but not good news, it's not about happiness itself. It's specifically about the gap between you closing in their favor. They needed that small win against you. Maybe you've outpaced them in some way, or threatened them, or simply reminded them of something they're insecure about. That micro smile is their body saying what they're too trained to say aloud. I'm glad this happened to you. The harder truth is that some people will smile at your pain and be kind anyway. Complexity lives in all of us, and a moment of schadenfreude doesn't automatically make someone your enemy. But if you see that pattern repeat, if the schadenfreude becomes the rhythm instead of a one-time slip, it tells you something about the baseline of the relationship. You're not safe with them, not fully, and sometimes the smallest facial twitch saves you from making bigger mistakes about who you're trusting with your vulnerabilities, which is why it's worth noticing what your own body already knows. That smile your gut registered before your mind caught up to it. The birthday timing tell. Your birthday rolls around and you notice something quietly telling. Some people reach out right at midnight, while others send a message 4 hours into your day, or worse, remember it 3 days late with an apologetic tone. The timing isn't random. It's the distance between you and their mind. Someone who keeps you in their active mental rotation will think of you before the day even starts, or they'll have set a reminder because you matter enough to not leave it to chance. That's different from the person who scrolls past a Facebook notification and texts you a quick "Happy birthday" at 2 p.m. because they just saw it. Neither is catastrophic. Both are human. But there's a gradient. The person who reaches out hours before midnight, who maybe calls instead of texts, who brings up something specific from your year together, they're carrying you around inside their day-to-day thought life. Compare that to someone who only resurfaces when the event shows up as a notification, and you get a real picture of where you sit in their regular rotation. The deeper tell comes when you notice the pattern over years. Does this person always arrive early, always arrive late, never arrive at all? Someone who consistently forgets or delays isn't being cruel. They might just be overwhelmed or scattered, or you're not the person they naturally think to prioritize. That's worth knowing cleanly rather than feeling the sting of it on repeat. What makes this so sharp is that birthdays are one of the few moments where everyone's playing by the same rules. There's no ambiguity in the calendar, no room for excuses to hide behind. The point is not to become paranoid about birthday text timing or obsess over timestamps. It's to notice what the timing is telling you about whether you're someone this person naturally remembers or someone they only find when prompted. Those are two different relationships, and knowing which one you have saves you from building resentment on sand. Attention to your accessories. Watch what happens the next time you're talking to someone and you mention something small about yourself. A new ring, a bag, a watch, a pin on your jacket. Do they notice? Better yet, do they ask about it? The people who genuinely care tend to collect these tiny details, like breadcrumbs. They'll circle back weeks later. Hey, whatever happened with that job interview? I remember you wore that blue scarf to it. That's not luck. That's someone paying attention to the map of who you are, one small object at a time. Accessories are easy to miss if you're not invested in someone. They're background noise to most people, just stuff on a body. But when someone notices what you're wearing, asks where you got it, compliments the color or the craftsmanship, they're doing something quiet but real. They're telling you that you're interesting enough to look at closely. They're confirming that you're not just a voice in their ear, you're a whole person they're actually seeing. The flip side matters too. If you've mentioned something 3 times, a new tattoo, a gift someone gave you, a vintage jacket you found, and they've never asked, never acknowledged it, you know something. It doesn't mean they dislike you. It often just means you're not on their radar the way you thought you were. They're probably friendly, but friendship has layers. Real attention is a tear up. People who love you or genuinely respect you tend to notice the small things because small things are how you actually know someone. Not their resume, not their opinions, but the objects they choose to carry, the colors that make them feel like themselves, the little investments in how they show up in the world. So the next time you're trying to read someone's true interest level, don't listen so hard. Look instead. Does your story land on their eyes or just their ears? That gap between hearing and seeing is where the real signal lives. Noticing changes without comment. You walk into a room wearing a new shirt, or your hair is different, or your voice sounds a little lower because you're tired. And someone who cares about you notices. They just notice. They don't announce it, or make it weird, or demand explanation. They see you've shifted something and they file it away. The way you might notice a familiar painting has been moved to a different wall. That quiet observation is worth more than 1,000 compliments, because it means you exist in their attention when you're not performing or asking for it. The flip side cuts harder. Someone who doesn't really see you won't track these changes at all. You could gain 30 pounds or lose your job or dye your hair purple, and they'd still respond to the version of you they built in their head 3 years ago. Not with cruelty, with indifference. They'll keep talking about your old dream as if you never mentioned the new one. They'll ask about your ex like you didn't spend 20 minutes explaining the breakup last month. The absence of noticing is its own language. It tells you that you're peripheral to their life, that they don't carry forward the details that make you specific. People who love you, or even just genuinely like you, accumulate knowledge of you over time. They remember the small shifts. They notice when something's off before you say anything. They might mention it later, or they might let you come to them, but they're paying attention. And when someone stops doing that, when the questions dry up and the small acknowledgments go silent, it often means something has shifted in how they relate to you. Your job is to notice who notices. Track who remembers the things you said 2 conversations ago, who catches the unspoken worry in your face, who shows up already knowing the context of your day. Those people are building a real relationship with you, not just killing time in the same room. The unremarked haircut. You walk in with a new cut, something you deliberated over, maybe spent an hour getting shaped up. You mention it to someone close to you, casual, fishing a little. They glance over and keep talking about their day. No comment, no, oh nice, no question, nothing. Just the continuation of whatever they were saying. Most people let this slide as nothing, but attention is a currency, and the absence of it lands heavier than we admit. When someone genuinely cares about you, they notice the small shifts. Not every haircut will spark a reaction. Fair, but the truly invested people in your life tend to clock changes because they're actually looking at you, not just past you. They're building a mental map of who you are, which means they notice when something shifts. The inverse is also true. Someone who moves through a conversation with you the way they move through a grocery store, scanning, efficient, checking boxes, won't land their eyes on those details. It's not malice usually, it's distraction, distance, or the simple fact that you don't rank high enough in their attention budget to register as worth tracking. Here's where it gets tricky though. Sometimes the unremarked haircut is a mercy. Not everyone has the emotional bandwidth to show up that way. A parent working 2 jobs, a friend in their own crisis, a colleague stretched thin. Their inattention might say nothing about how they feel and everything about what they're carrying. So don't weaponize this one alone, but stack it with other small absences. The way they answer your questions with statements about themselves, how often they ask about your week, whether they remember details you've told them before. The rhythm of follow-up messages, and a picture starts to form. The unremarked haircut becomes a thread you can pull. It won't tell you the whole story, but it's one honest signal in a conversation full of them. Blink rate under your gaze. Watch someone's eyes the next time you're talking about something that matters. Not in a creepy way, just notice what happens. A person who feels comfortable and genuinely interested in you will blink at their normal baseline rate, around 15 to 20 times a minute, steady as a metronome. But the moment you trigger something, shame, attraction, defensiveness, real vulnerability, that number shifts like a dial turning. Some people's blinks accelerate, a sign their nervous system is ramping up, processing threat or intensity the way your body revs an engine. Others go the opposite direction and blink less, their eyes hardening into a stare as they mentally retreat or lock into protection mode, like shutters closing. The brutal truth is, people can't really control this. You can fake a smile, rehearse a compliment, even modulate your voice to sound warm and open. But your eyelids, they're running on autopilot, answering to your limbic system, not your conscious mind, which means they're tattling on you whether you want them to or not. If someone's blinking speeds up when you lean in close, it might mean they're nervous. Could be attraction, could be anxiety, could be they're lying, and their amygdala just went on alert. If their blink rate drops and their eyes go still and focused, they're either intensely present with you or they've mentally checked out and are waiting for this to end. A person who truly respects you and feels safe tends to maintain steady, natural blink patterns even during during vulnerable moments, they're not struggling to regulate their body. Someone who feels judged or doesn't actually care what you think often shows unmistakable shifts, rapid-fire blinking from stress, or that flat, infrequent blink of emotional distance. The eyelid is honest in ways the mouth never will be. Next time you notice the change, don't call it out or make it weird. Just file it away quietly. That small shift in their blink is telling you something their words haven't figured out how to say yet. Pupil response in agreement. Your pupils dilate when you see something you like, and that's not metaphorical. It's literal biology wired into your nervous system before your conscious mind even catches up. When someone's eyes widen slightly while you're talking, especially during a moment where you're sharing something vulnerable or asking for their genuine buy-in, their brain is literally telling you it's interested, and they might not even know it's happening. Their conscious mind could be playing it cool, performing the right nods and murmurs, but those little circles in the center of their eyes are honest in a way words simply can't be, because they operate on a level below the scripts we all carry around. Watch what happens when you reveal something important, something that matters to you. If someone genuinely cares about what you're saying, if they're truly engaged and not just being polite to get through the moment, their pupils will usually dilate, a tiny widening that happens without permission. The opposite is just as telling. A person sitting across from you with completely unchanged pupils while they nod and say all the right things. That's a mismatch worth noting, and it doesn't necessarily mean they dislike you, but it does mean they're not fully present in that moment with you. Maybe they're distracted, uncomfortable with vulnerability, or thinking about what to eat later. Pupil dilation happens for other reasons too: light levels, fatigue, whether they're looking down at their phone. So in steady conversation and consistent lighting, the pattern reveals itself across multiple emotional beats. Someone who consistently shows pupil dilation when you share ideas or feelings has a nervous system responding positively, whether their mouth has caught up to that truth yet or not. This isn't a foolproof lie detector. Nothing ever is, but it works as a secondary signal alongside your gut. Next time you're unsure if someone's investment in you is real, glance briefly at their eyes when you hit an emotional beat in your story, and you might catch the truth before they do. The lip compression tell. Watch what happens the moment someone disagrees with you but hasn't said it yet. Their lips thin, flatten. Sometimes they press them together so hard you can see the color drain. That's not a nervous habit. That's a valve closing. Your mouth stops working when you're containing something. Doubt, irritation, a correction that's fighting to get out. It's primal, automatic, and it happens before the thinking brain catches up. You've just said something that landed wrong, and their body is literally swallowing the response. The compression isn't always a full-strength clamp either. Sometimes it's subtle. A quick tightening at the corners, a barely there flattening that lasts less than a second. But if you're paying attention, you'll catch it, because it comes right after you've made a claim or asked a question, and their eyes go a little distant. What makes this particular tell so hard to fake is that it lives below the level of conscious control. Most micro-expressions take some effort to produce. Lip compression just happens when someone is holding back. They might smile right after, nod, say, "Yeah, totally." But if those lips compressed in between, you know there's a disagreement in the room that isn't getting voiced. The tricky part is what you do with that knowledge. If you notice the compression and immediately call it out, you don't seem convinced. You might shut them down completely. They'll double down on whatever they were holding back or retreat into politeness. Instead, try a smaller move. Ask a genuine question that gives them permission to be honest. What's your read on that? Or, does that land for you? Often the compression softens and the real thought comes out. Sometimes it doesn't, and that tells you something equally important. It means they don't feel safe with you yet. The compression is the truth your eyes caught before their words got a vote. Either way, you're not guessing anymore. Nostril flare on disagreement. You're mid-sentence explaining your take on something, a work decision, a plan, a memory, and you watch their nostrils widen just slightly. It's fast, maybe a tenth of a second, but it's there. That tiny dilation happens when the nervous system floods with adrenaline, and it almost always fires before someone's face catches up with their feeling. What you're seeing is not agreement. It's a micro-surge of stress or threat response. The body saying, "Wait, I'm being challenged," before the mouth figures out what to say back. The tricky part is that flared nostrils don't tell you what they disagree with. It could be your logic, your tone, your right to have the opinion at all, but they do tell you the disagreement hit them as significant. It's not a casual, interesting point. It's friction. And here's what makes it worth tracking. Most people don't control their nostrils consciously. You can fake a smile. You can hold eye contact when you're furious. You can even modulate your voice. But that involuntary dilation, that's the nervous system speaking directly. No filter, no rehearsal. It happens whether someone is trained in poker faces or not. The subtle part nobody talks about is that this response doesn't care whether you're right or wrong, only that they felt cornered or questioned. So the next time you see it, resist the urge to keep talking. That's when most people double down, thinking they need to convince the other person harder. Instead, pause. Ask a real question. Give them space to actually say what the resistance is about. That flare just told you they're not ready to move forward with your version of the story, and pushing usually makes them dig in deeper, turns a moment of doubt into a moment of defense. Small shift, big difference. Watch for it long enough, and you'll start to see the pattern. The flare is a green light to stop explaining and start listening. Self-soothing gestures near you. Watch someone's hands when they're talking to you. Are they touching their own face, pulling at their sleeves, playing with a necklace, running fingers through their hair, adjusting a collar for the third time? That's the nervous system speaking before the mouth does, and it rarely lies. Self-soothing behaviors like fidgeting, nail picking, rubbing the back of the neck, or fussing with fabric are the body's quiet way of managing discomfort, and the real signal isn't the gesture itself, but whether they're doing it around you specifically. If someone's relaxed with other people, but their jaw tightens and their hands start self-grooming the moment you enter the room, that gap tells you something raw. They might like you, but feel watched, or they might be intimidated, or waiting for judgment. They might care what you think in a way that makes their nervous system spike. The opposite matters just as much. People who genuinely feel at ease around you don't need to soothe themselves. Their hands stay still, or gesture openly. There's no internal friction to manage. In romantic contexts, someone who touches their own arms or chest while talking to a crush is often running an internal temperature check, trying to regulate anxiety or attraction they're not quite ready to show. In professional settings, the person fidgeting through an entire conversation with you might respect you intensely, or they might resent you and be burning energy to stay polite. Context always shapes meaning. Here's what sticks. People are almost entirely unaware they're doing this. They can't fake it convincingly, and they can't hide it for long under real pressure. If you notice the self-soothing stops halfway through your conversation, that's the real tell. They've either decided to trust you, or they've given up trying to impress you, and sometimes those are the same thing. Pay attention to when the hands settle, because that moment often marks the shift from performed self to something closer to actual, and that's when you're finally seeing them as they see themselves. Barrier objects on the table. Next time you're sitting across from someone at a coffee shop or dinner table, notice what's between you. Phone, water glass, napkin holder, purse. Your nervous system reads these objects like a map before your conscious mind catches up. When someone genuinely wants to connect, the table clears naturally, or at least the barriers drift to the edges, out of the direct line between you. But watch what happens when someone feels guarded or rushed. They accumulate objects like defensive architecture. A phone stays face up as a conversation partner. A bag gets clutched and kept close. Hands fidget with a pen instead of resting open. Their body is building a small fortress between you and them, one object at a time, and their deeper nervous system is doing the work their words won't. These barriers speak what the person might never say out loud. They might smile and use warm words, but if everything on that table is positioned like a moat, if their belongings form a perimeter, something underneath doesn't feel safe enough to fully land. Context matters. Sometimes it's not personal at all. Sometimes they're late for somewhere else, stressed about something unrelated, or exhausted from being around people that week. But sometimes it means they don't trust you yet, or they're protecting something they don't want you to see, or they're already halfway checked out of the conversation. A person who's fully present with you rarely realizes how much physical space they've naturally cleared. Their stuff drifts to the periphery without effort. Their hands stay visible. The table stops being a border and becomes a meeting place. This is why stacking matters. One barrier object means nothing. A phone at dinner with a friend you text constantly is just noise. But a phone, a bag, folded napkin, crossed arms, and a defensive posture all stacked together while someone says they're happy to see you. That's a different story. The body speaks louder than courtesy ever will. Listen to it. Feet direction versus torso. Your body is betraying you right now, and theirs is too. Watch what happens at a party when someone is genuinely interested in you. Their feet point toward you, not their shoulders or face, which are easy to fake. During a conversation, a torso might angle in your direction out of pure politeness or habit, the social reflex we've all learned, but the feet will angle away if someone is mentally calculating an exit. You'll catch their weight shifting to the ball of their foot, primed to pivot. You'll see them standing at an angle that lets them swivel without breaking eye contact or seeming rude. The feet are lazy. They don't perform. They don't worry about appearing kind or attentive because nobody told us feet matter, so the brain never trained them to lie. When someone is genuinely locked in, engaged, wanting to stay in the conversation, their whole lower body relaxes into your direction. Toes pointing, weight settled, no coiling tension. When they're tolerating you or enduring the talk, their feet will inch toward the door or pivot towards someone else across the room. The distance matters too. Someone who actually wants to connect will often shift slightly closer. The feet move in almost without thinking. Someone who feels trapped or pressured will widen their stance or create more space between you. That dissonance. Smile holding steady while the feet start fidgeting or angling away. That's the moment their mind has already checked out, even though their mouth keeps performing. Watch especially for what happens when you share something vulnerable. Do their feet pull back? Do they lean away or create distance? The body doesn't lie about comfort, and the feet are the most honest part of it. Next time you're talking with someone, let your eyes drop casually down. You're not hunting for drama. You're reading the quiet language between compliance and genuine connection. The feet know what the face is trying so hard to hide. The seat choice pattern. Watch what happens the moment someone walks into a room where there's an open chair near you, not where they eventually settle after the social shuffle, where they actually choose when the choice is truly theirs. If they pull a chair closer or leave one deliberately empty between you, if they angle their whole body toward you instead of sitting parallel, they're voting with their physics in a way that bypasses any script their mouth might follow. Bodies don't lie like words do, but pay equal attention to the inverse. The person who sits where they can't see you without rotating their head or positions themselves so the door stays in their sight line and you become peripheral vision. That's a vote too. It's rarely conscious, but proximity is a form of truth-telling. Someone who genuinely values your presence will often gravitate to where conversation feels inevitable, close enough that silences don't feel strained, where turning slightly feels natural instead of rehearsed. They lean in, they position themselves so your face is their resting view. Someone keeping you at distance might take the chair that forces you to raise your voice, or sit in a way where standing up and leaving requires zero awkward shuffling. Watch this pattern repeat across contexts. In one-on-one coffee, do they sit across from you or beside you? As conversation deepens, do they pull closer or hold steady? At group dinners, do they arrange themselves where glancing at you costs nothing, or do they sit so that looking at you requires deliberate effort? Notice the people whose knees point toward you even when their shoulders stay still, whose weight shifts your direction when you're talking. Notice the others, the ones already halfway toward the exit in their posture before you've finished your sentence. None of this is absolute. Some people are simply reserved by nature, or anxious in crowds, or dealing with physical pain. Context matters, but when someone consistently seats themselves in ways that make genuine connection harder rather than easier, month after month, they're telling you something quieter than any promise. They're showing you what actual priority looks like when engagement isn't automatic. Distance renegotiation over time. You know that feeling when someone used to text you back within minutes, and now it takes hours or days. Most people chalk it up to busyness, but there's something subtler happening in the gap. Distance renegotiation is when someone silently rewrites the rules of how close you get to be. It's not a blow-up. It's a slow fade written in response times, canceled plans, and shorter text messages. The person isn't angry. They're just repositioning you. Think about the friend who used to call you on their drive home and now only texts group chats, or the relative who used to ask about your week and now sends one-word replies. They're not breaking up with you. They're editing the contract without saying so. The tricky part is that people rarely announce this shift directly because it feels too real, too final. Instead, they let the new distance do the talking. You'll catch yourself triple-checking texts to see if you said something wrong, when really the distance was already baked in before you opened your mouth. What makes this so revealing is that people almost always distance themselves from those they no longer prioritize or trust. It's an unconscious ranking system playing out in real time. If someone's recalibrating how available they are to you, not because of crisis or legitimate life change, but because they're choosing to, that choice is information. It tells you where you sit now. The hard part isn't reading it. The hard part is accepting it without rewriting the story into something it's not. Sometimes people drift because they've made space for someone else. Sometimes they drift because they've decided you're lower maintenance than they thought you wanted to be. Sometimes the shift is because they're protecting themselves from a pattern they've seen repeat. Either way, the renegotiation is honest. It's them showing you through behavior what they've already decided about the relationship. Listen to it. Don't argue with the distance or try to close the gap by doing more. That usually just speeds up the fade. Touch initiation thresholds. Watch what happens the next time someone you're close to, a friend, partner, or family member, is sitting next to you. Do they brush your arm when they laugh? Lean in and touch your shoulder to make a point? Or do they keep their hands to themselves, maintaining that invisible buffer even when the moment feels intimate? The answer tells you something the words never will. People who genuinely like you and feel safe around you tend to close the physical distance without thinking about it. A hand on your back as you walk through a door, a light touch on your knee when they're being vulnerable. These aren't grand gestures. They're the small, unconscious permissions we give ourselves with people we trust. They signal that you live inside the circle, not outside looking in. Conversely, someone who keeps their hands in their lap, crosses their arms, or pulls back when you inch closer is signaling discomfort. Not necessarily rejection, but a boundary you're bumping against. The tricky part is that touch initiation varies wildly by culture, family background, and personality type. Some people are just not touchy by nature, and that's real. But what matters is the consistency you notice over time. Does this person touch other people freely, but never you? That's information. Do they touch you when they're relaxed and animated, but go stiff when you try to reciprocate? That's also information. The real tell surfaces when the guard drops, when someone forgets to be careful around you because they've stopped monitoring the distance between your bodies. That's when the true threshold shows up, unfiltered and honest. If you want to know where you actually stand with someone, stop listening to what they say about how much they value you, and instead, watch whether their body moves toward yours or away. Their hands will say what their mouth is still rehearsing. Goodbye duration and drift. Watch the door. That moment when someone says goodbye is a window into whether they actually want to be around you or just feel obligated to the ritual itself. If someone genuinely values you, the goodbye stretches naturally, like neither of you is quite ready to snap the spell. They linger in the doorway, keep talking, find one more thing to say. Their feet don't point toward the car yet. They're not already mentally leaving while their mouth is still moving, checking their phone, scanning the street for an escape route. But the real tell lives here. Notice if the goodbye drifts. That's when someone starts the farewell process, but then keeps standing there, not quite making eye contact, their attention already halfway down the sidewalk or mentally 3 steps ahead. They're physically present, but psychologically gone, which is somehow worse than a quick, clean exit because it's like watching someone practice leaving before they actually do. A person who thinks well of you doesn't rush the threshold. They extend it. They ask one more question. They actually want those last few seconds with you. The drift happens when someone feels obligated to the goodbye itself, not to you. They're honoring the social script, performing the ritual, not genuinely reluctant to go. And notice who initiates the goodbye. If you're always the one saying goodbye first, always the one cutting it short because the silence got heavy and you're tired of holding space, that's information worth sitting with. Someone who thinks well of you doesn't leave you holding the last goodbye by yourself. They meet you there. They make it feel mutual, reciprocal, like both of you are fighting a little bit, not to break the spell. The person who announces their departure, disappears for 5 minutes, then texts from their car, is sending a different message entirely. The time between goodbye and actual exit tells you everything about how much mental real estate you actually occupy in someone's world. The doorway conversation extension. You know that moment when someone says, "Okay, I should go," and then keeps talking. Watch what happens next. It's a small tell that matters more than you'd think. If someone genuinely wants to leave but lingers at the door, extending the conversation with fresh topics, questions about your life, or throwaway comments, they are not actually ready to go. They like being near you more than their stated schedule admits. The doorway extension reveals what the initial goodbye tried to hide. Contrast that with the person who says they need to leave and then actually walks toward the exit without looking back. Straight, purposeful, done. That person respects the boundary they set. But there's a third type. The person who walks to the door, pauses, turns back with, "Oh, one more thing," and genuinely has something to share. That's different again. It's not avoidance of goodbye. It's a real thought that surfaced. The distinction matters because people who care about you often fight against their own time constraints just to stay in the moment a little longer. They might say, "I really do need to go," and mean it, but their feet don't match their words. They're reorganizing their mental departure, trying to stretch the interaction. Pay attention to whether the extension feels natural and warm, or whether it feels like they are negotiating with themselves to stay. The warm extension, where they keep turning back to you, asking real questions, genuinely present, tells you they value the time and your company enough to fight against their own schedule and resist the pull toward whatever comes next. The negotiated goodbye, where they seem torn or guilty about leaving, might signal conflict or ambivalence they are not saying out loud. Sometimes the person who lingers is actually afraid of the silence that comes after, or they are storing up enough of you to carry them through their day. The honest part is this: most people's bodies tell the truth before their mouths do. The doorway is honest, in a way the handshake often is not. Post-conversation message, initiation. You finish a conversation, maybe coffee, maybe a call, maybe a group dinner. You put your phone down. An hour passes, 2. And then, does the other person text you first? Or do you always have to be the one to start the next thread? This tiny asymmetry tells you something real about how much real estate you occupy in their head. When someone genuinely values you, they don't need a perfect reason to reach out. They think of you, and they send something. A meme, "that conversation stuck with me," a random question they know you'd care about. There's no cost-benefit calculation happening. When you're always the initiator, it's worth asking whether you're building momentum or just keeping a door open that only opens from your side. The tricky part is context. Some people are genuinely bad texters. Some are buried. Some grew up in families where spontaneous connection felt clingy, so they learned to wait for you to prove you want them first. And now that habit is calcified. That's real. But if someone consistently texts others first and never you, or if they respond warmly every single time but never loop back with their own spark, that's information. It means you're in a reactive slot rather than a proactive one. You're convenient, maybe well-liked, but not on their radar the way they're on yours. The move here isn't to stop texting. That's a power play, and it stings everyone. Instead, notice the pattern without judgment. If it matters to you that relationships feel mutual, this person might need to stay in a different category. If you can genuinely enjoy the connection exactly as it is, responding when they reach out, being present when they're present, then let it be light. But don't pretend the asymmetry isn't there. Your attention is valuable. Don't spend it trying to convince someone to notice you when plenty of others are already thinking of reasons to reach out. The next day callback rate. Days pass after a conversation that felt real. Actual laughter, easy rhythm, maybe loose plans exchanged, and then the phone stays quiet. No text, no voice note, no, "Hey, I was thinking about what you said." Your nervous system reads this fast. Even if your ego stalls, you weren't the person worth reaching for when they had time alone. If someone genuinely lit up around you, the callback flows naturally. Almost involuntarily. They remember a joke you landed, they spot something, and your name arrives first in their head. They need a thought partner and reach for you before anyone else. It's not about being flawless or hitting every conversational beat. It's about whether you stuck, whether you created enough resonance that forgetting felt harder than remembering. The next day callback rate strips away every social crutch. The momentum of the room, the politeness that fills air, the pressure of the moment. 24 hours later, when no one's watching and the person has their choices back, they either think of you or they don't. They either want to keep the thread alive or they let it drop into silence. Sure, context matters. Tiredness, circumstances, competing obligations, all real. But patterns don't lie. If the callback never comes from certain people, or only when you initiate, or arrives weeks late when you've already moved on, that's honest data about where you sit in their mind when you're absent. The flip side matters too. Notice who reaches back quickly, who takes a beat first, who follows up with real substance versus a bare emoji reaction. Notice who mentions something specific you said instead of a generic, "That was fun." Those quiet choices reveal how much mental real estate you occupy in their thinking when the room empties and they're alone with their own list of people. That's where the actual conversation lives, not in what they said to your face, but in what they did next when nobody was listening.